Yeah,
I guess I didn't
went
say that.
into went into whistleblowing,
Mm.
discussed a lot of the things on policing. People try to treat me like a hero, like somebody to protect
Mm.
and bring solutions out into the world. I traveled all over the country talking to activists in nearly all 50 states. I was somebody who led the Veteran Stand movement in North Dakota. I have obtained my PhD in business management because that's where I figured that I have seen that in managerial issues, everything really boils down to incentives and disincentives and playing the kind of social sciences that you need
Mm.
to get the best results out of people and the service that police particularly provide. I'm generally discussing things with people who have absolutely no experience or no experience remotely near the level of mine.
Sure.
So I kind of get a little wondering uh, how dedicated people are to their ideas because they
Mm.
tend to not write them down. They tend to not support them. They tend to really just be opinions.
Yeah.
And, my opinion, I got to clarify, is equally as invalid as everyone else's opinion.
Hey,
I just don't
I
deal in
won't give
that
you
realm.
that.
Okay. I just don't deal in the realm of opinions. And I'm just trying to find actual operating systems and the way
Yeah.
science says things need to be improved and
Mm.
basic philosophies that lead us there because the principles and the philosophical underpinnings, I think, are the most important aspect of anything we're trying to do to change
Yeah.
society.
I guess I don't like going like super hard into philosophy. I feel like that's a way to like obstruct it. Like philosophy is important, obviously. Having like a philosophical underpinning to the things you want to do, I definitely think is really important. Um, I actually watched your conversation with that the CUNY philosophy grad guy. Um, it was a little bit longer, so I was like, oh, okay, I'll get some better idea on your positions here or whatever. So I watched that whole thing today while preparing for this. Took some notes. Um, you said you talked about like having objective systems. Can you just like clarify that a little bit for me? Like objective
Sure.
means
So one of
essentially
the things I
something.
encountered is we're all trying to fight, well, let's just say people who are trying to improve systems amongst people in social sciences. We're trying to find a way to provide equity. Equality really doesn't make any sense, as most of us
Mm,
in reform movements would
yeah.
understand. You need to, equity is about giving things to lift up certain disadvantages. But it's very critical that those disadvantages come from objective measurements, not whether someone is black, which is a subjective measurement, not whether someone is poor, which is a subjective measurement. You have to go by actual salary things, like how much money do they actually have? Are they male or female? You can't go by gender. I'm sorry, gender is a social construct. No social constructs can enter into our measurements of what equity will actually be because those subjective things are just moving targets that mean something different to virtually everybody. And it's, for example, if I just tell you to describe what a man is, you literally, once we get technical enough, you will not be able to agree with any single other human being on the complete definition of what constitutes a man or being black or anything else like that that's fabricated.
Mm. Okay, so when you say so, can you just run through the categories of things you think are objective real quick for me again? You said like man, woman, um,
No, that's subjective. That's a social construct, man and woman.
or
So
male and female sex.
male and female,
Yeah.
amount of poverty, how long you've lived in a neighborhood, how many times you've been arrested, how many 911 calls come from your neighborhood.
Mm.
Anything that's literally objective.
Okay, so when you say like amount of poverty, I guess like I find that. What,
Poverty is a relative term,
yeah.
so it
Okay.
means nothing. You know.
Wait. So you're saying that's subjective or objective?
It's subjective. It means nothing. It's a
Oh,
relative
okay. I thought
term.
you were saying that was
So if you're
okay.
being in poverty in America is still the world's elite.
Mm. Uh, yeah, and I guess we'd say that doesn't really mean much for in terms of like what we want to do in a given country. Because you'd probably agree with this, I guess, because I don't think we're that far off. You're like do you consider yourself like kind of liberalish or like classical liberal or something like that, or I won't
Yeah, I
stick
mean,
you to
I
a
guess
label, just a
I'm not
general
into
idea.
any
I don't,
labels.
yeah, I'm kind of
Yeah.
in the same
I'm
boat.
just
I
not.
don't really care,
Yeah,
but
just formulate solid ideas, have
mm,
things that back them up, and be willing to change your mind in the face of better evidence or ideas.
okay. So I had some things that we can go over here. I'm not going to try and bombard you or like sideswipe you on anything. So like you called like Rod Graham racist, and I think the conversation of like racism came up with the other dude too. And I guess I want to deconstruct, like, if we're going to call stuff like affirmative action, like racist, in the sense where it's like using race to qualify something. I guess we want to say, like, well, why do we think racism is bad? Or, like, I guess, why do you think racism is bad? Like, I have my conception on why racism is bad. I just want to see if we're, like, misaligned there or something.
Classifying anybody into a subjective measurement or an immutable characteristic and then treating them differently is inherently wrong.
Why is it inherently wrong?
Because we're all human beings. We all need to treat everybody the same. That's just my moral position. If you think we need to treat other people as lesser or more or better than us, then that's cool. I don't see how we could ever get on the same page.
Well, it's more like, can categories like social constructs help us understand phenomenon
I just explained how they can't, because they can't even be defined. So go ahead and define black.
Go ahead and define black.
Yeah, if you're going to call people black, define what the term means.
Sure, and then black is a socially defined construct of people who have a sufficiently dark pigment that get like just sort of classified by. I would say it's like sort of not a heuristic, I guess, but something that, you know.
Just give me a clear definition. Please don't jump around and just define it.
That's like the clear definition is it's just it's a subjective categorization of people who have a darker pigment tone.
Yeah, so are albino Africans not black?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a little more complicated than that, I guess.
No, you need to be able to define that. I mean, immediately destroying your definition by an easy example.
So, I guess they might be of African descent, but are they black in terms of how they're treated socially? I mean, I don't know. I guess it depends if you can like ascertain that they're black.
You have to know. You have to know in order to take the next step.
Like, have you ever seen an albino black person? I know it sounds like a weird question, but I feel like they have identifiable characteristics besides that, don't they?
I don't believe in classifying anyone as black. You do, so please explain it to me.
So I guess when you say, like, do I believe in classifying people as black, I think it's a thing that we socially do. Whether or not I think it's good or bad to do that, it's sort of irrelevant in terms of if it's a classification that.
No, is it good or bad to murder people?
I would say it's bad to murder people.
Okay, so that's just something that we do.
Sorry, wait, did I miss the point there?
Yeah, you said classifying people as race is just something that we do. Just because we do it is no measurement of its correctness.
Sure, but then we could say, like, okay, people get killed, and we can classify whether some killing is good or bad, and if there's a utility to understanding the concept of, like, killing somebody, I guess.
I said murder. I didn't say killing.
Sure, but well, that's begging the question then, right? Because baked into the concept of murder is it being wrong, more immoral, or illegal.
No, baked into the concept of racism is that it's wrong. Have you not been paying attention?
So I guess I'll backtrack, because when I first messaged you, I said something a little rude on the YouTube comment section, and I'm going to try and be a nice guy here. You know, I think I said something about, like, you know, if it got heated, I would drag my balls across your face verbally, and I don't want to do that. I like having good faith conversations. So, like, I'm not trying to be an asshole about it. I'm trying to, like, understand these concepts. So,
no, I don't think you're being an asshole. I don't think you've thought about it.
Oh, I thought quite a lot about it.
Okay, well then give me a definition of who is black.
It's not like a clear.
You thought about definition. It. You've gone through this. You've researched. Please define who a black person is.
You don't have to. You don't have to agree with the definition. Whether or not to say, like, we identify certain people as black in this country based on their
right. So it's Michael Jackson wasn't black according to you.
I think he was black.
I need to understand.
I'm just gonna play, like.
Was Michael Jackson black?
I don't care about, like, if any individual is considered black or not in this context. Whether an albino.
Well, then what's the collective if a collective isn't a bunch of individuals? That doesn't make any sense.
Oh boy.
If you can't define any one individual as black, how can you classify a community as black? That makes zero sense.
Well, you can describe them as black. You could say someone is black. They can grow up.
But then describe them.
Black. Someone with the dark skin pigmentation. How is that complicated?
Right. So you're saying that Sean King is in fact not black.
He's a darker skin pigmentation. Doesn't he look like Hispanic or something?
His pigment is much lighter than mine. You're looking at me. He is much lighter than me. There are many people who call themselves black who are much lighter in complexion than I am. Do you say those people are not black?
There's probably. Would I say they're not black? I think it depends on like the circumstance. If I'm talking about someone's black in terms of their experience with the criminal justice system, it's kind of like how are they treated in that context. And there is that subjective determination on if a cop thinks you're black. Like for example, you mentioned Albino person or Michael Jackson. If I know you got into an argument about the pulling people over being more likely when they're black during the day than at night when racial characteristics are less defined. So if a cop are trying to decide if they're going to pull someone over who's in a nice car and they're albino, well, you can't identify the African albino characteristics that well. Just seeing someone in a car, you just be like, oh, light colored skin. So in that sense, it's like a label society thrusts upon you, and then maybe you find some utility out of. So understanding how that label is thrust on other people can be useful in understanding how society understands these groups of people that we arbitrarily defined.
Yeah, I understand that you're arbitrarily defining people in a category and then treating them differently. That's the definition of racism. Congrats.
Wait, I'm not saying we should treat them differently. I'm saying that society...
You just did. You just said in the context of policing, then they're treated differently. So then we need to change the rules for them, right?
We need to change the rules for them, or we need to...
Right. So you said you wanted to study the idea of something. You said like law enforcement, pulling people over at different times of day.
I was referencing
suggesting
the study, study across the United States that got police data for traffic stops that they performed. I think it was like 600,000 different instances, and they did it along like racial lines, how the police officers identified the people they were pulling over.
Right. So the police officers get to define who's black. Then you're saying
pretty much.
Okay, so police officers get to define who's black and who's white.
Well, anyone in a given instance decides if the person they're dealing with like belongs to a social.
Right. So you don't get to identify yourself. So say someone was transgender and they wanted to be identified as being a man when they were born a female. You're saying that that's irrelevant. It's how other people treat them.
Well,
and how other labels.
I think that's a pretty good example, right? So their internal understanding of themselves can be as valid as they want, but what they really want is that external validation from others. So black people want to be
right. So this is where we're getting to, where there's some reason to appeal to your definition or to the police definitions. If you're going to you're literally saying that all black people don't get to define themselves as a community. It's what white people and police have defined them as. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's sort of. I think there's a back and forth there of them being mistreated as a group. Due to historical reasons.
What fucking group, dude? You keep saying as a group and you won't define the group. So all dark-plectic people are treated differently by the police. That's patently false.
Well, it doesn't have to be all. It has to be like a proportional thing or a statistical higher representation.
How? Police do not respond to demographics, so we can hit that stupid-ass argument if you want. Police do not respond to demographics.
Yes, they do. I mean,
no, they do not. They do not answer. They respond to 911 calls and violence. They don't. By your argument of saying disproportional, that would mean that 22% of police killings should be against the elderly.
Do you think that they can target a specific demographic for policing conduct? Can that be a thing? Police don't only respond to like you were a cop, right? I work for the police, so we both.
Yeah. So now again, you're going to explain to me policing, though you never spent a fucking second in the boots. But cool, go ahead.
Hey, motherfucker! I just said I work for the police.
So what?
Okay. Like, I have a master's degree in criminal justice and I work for the fucking police, but you're going to like cite your personal experience? I don't give a fuck about your personal experience. I care about data. The same thing you said in the very beginning. That's what I care about. What I'm referring to is the Ferguson, Missouri study that found out they were specifically targeting the black population in Ferguson for revenue generation. There's a 112-page DOJ or 100-something page DOJ report, maybe it's 200 pages, talking about the Ferguson misconduct specifically targeted at their black population.
Right. So there are instances where this happens. What I'm telling you is it won't actually be because they're black. It will be because of an objective measurement. You can point to the study. And if I told you, if you wanted to point to a study for me to point out flaws for it, I could do so. But that's a junk study because, again, who is classifying who is black? You're relying entirely on a police narrative. Okay. Do you want me to finish?
Sure.
You're relying entirely on a police narrative of data and then making that data say what you want. Those people also were in a particular area. They have a pattern in practice. They're the ones being called by 911. That was a black police department in a black area. I hear what you're saying, and because there's one police department that will have a correlate to that, you need to find something much bigger than pointing out one police department for disproportionately doing something. So I agree with that policing shouldn't be doing any kind of revenue generation, period. So, I mean, the idea that it's disproportional because police are where violence is occurring is just it's just fallacious.
No, no, no.
Police
So if you're
respond.
not
Hold
familiar with
on.
the study,
Police.
it's okay.
Hold on. Let me explain. Okay. Again, you've tout your masters. I got a PhD. So let's go a little bit further. Let me explain it to you, student. So when you're looking at these issues, you have to see what the actual data is and what you're actually looking at. The police respond to violence. They are in the area where 911 calls and violence occurs. So the great injustice is on innocent people who are in the proximity of violence.
If you do not know the DOJ report I'm referring to, that is fine. You do not need to know the report I'm referring to.
I've read it. It doesn't have any valuable data.
What are the conclusions from that fucking report? I don't know them all offhand. Have you read it? You're so familiar that you could dismiss it all
right, because if you're using black by the if you're saying black is defined by the police department, and you're using solely police department data, what I'm telling you as a cop is for instance in Baltimore, when you conduct a field interview, you have on your list, you have black, white, Hispanic, something else. I don't remember what it is, and you're just checking boxes. Cops really don't give a shit about any of the boxes. The data is absolute bullshit.
So saying there can be errors in the data, I can understand. Now saying that they're literally like it's almost like they're playing pin the tail of the donkey for which box they're checking. Is that really what you're proposing to me? That every single cop is literally randomly filling this out to where the point that this data is absolutely worthless? Is that what you're honestly trying to tell me right now?
Yeah, it's almost worthless, because what happens is the officer fills out these things on like a piece of paper that's called an FI card, and then they give a receipt to the person that they stopped. They're supposed to do it. I'm telling you, personally, I did better paperwork than most other cops, and I fill these out maybe 10% of the time. And if I'm filling them out, generally I'm filling them out because I made a subsequent arrest. And that's how you backtrack and you make sure your case is all solid. You establish probable cause going backwards. So what happens is for one, if black people, as you define them, are committing more violence and they're again caught up in the proximity near violence, then they're going to be in the area where cops are looking to enforce things. That's simply how it happens. It doesn't have anything to do with whether the person is actually black or not. It's in their proximity of violence. And if you can come in from the outside and say black is a correlate, yes, but black is an incredible correlate to violence, and police respond to violence.
I mean, I don't know if you're just going to dismiss the entire DOJ study into like the things of Ferguson by saying, oh, it's only one city, but when they did in that city, like the data wasn't accurate and like this, none of it was actually true. Like what am I supposed to even say to that? You're just disagreeing.
I just explained to you how you're taking data that is entirely from the police department. And so what happens also after the officers fill out the piece of paper is it goes into a bin somewhere else. And these things will be years behind and they're actually getting put into the computer systems. And then a bunch of cadets come in and they put the things into the computer system with another level of translation. And again, because it is disproportionate to the population, is no metric to whether the police are doing anything. It must be disproportional to the violence. Police do
I'm not talking about violent crime right now. I'm talking about you saying
you
this
are
started, no,
because
I am not
in the proximity of violence.
I'm talking about in Ferguson, Missouri, a place that has I think it's like 30-40% black population. Their police department was 90-something% white. I think it was like 97% white. I think they had one black officer among like 60 or 80 sworn officers. And when the DOJ did an investigation into this, they found that they were targeting the black community not for violent crime, but for citing them.
Not.
That's what they say in the report.
Disproportional. Listen, they found it was disproportional to the population. You can call that targeted if you want.
Let's pull it up right now. This is the Ferguson DOJ report.
Go ahead.
There's a top line summary. I wouldn't normally fucking waste my time doing this. Let's say
Go ahead.
I'm willing to be wrong. You know, maybe I read it years ago, so it's possible I'm misremembering it.
How could you possibly prove targeting?
I don't know. Maybe read the report and you know their answer. But let's find out. Hold on. Leave me real. I'll skim read it real quick.
Hang on a second. You guys are all children.
All right, dude. Hang on a second. First investigation. It's literally like a top level like section summary where it says focus on generating revenue. Like it's an entire subsection of the thing. The city budget for
Yes,
cyber.
they focus on generating revenue. I understand police departments do that, and it's wrong.
You
Okay.
just said they didn't do it. They were in the area looking for violent crime. That's what you just said.
No, I said revenue generation is bad. You said targeting because they're black. I'm objecting to the targeting because they're black. I'm not objecting to the revenue generation being wrong at all. I mean, this is something I spoke out about thousands of times. Civil asset forfeiture, all that stuff is wrong. You're mixing topics.
Well, I agree with you that these things are wrong. We're not going to disagree that I'm sure on the litany of criminal justice issues,
but
we're going to make
demonstrating that something is disproportional to a demographic does not correlate that it's targeted. I'm sorry. The author of the study and the DOJ can say whatever the fuck they want. It doesn't make them right. It doesn't make them the authority.
And then how do we know things? Like I said in the beginning of this, I want to avoid like going down philosophical, but I feel like I need to go down some epistemological rabbit hole of how do we know what we know then? If you're going to dismiss
I can explain.
a DOJ
I mean, this
report
is the things I demonstrate. But this is why I write. This is why I demonstrate these things. This is why I've written all of these fucking questions already out in written form for everybody to read on Medium or any of my published books. Look at them. I explained this in minute detail. But what part do you understand? How do we know it's true? When it comes to policing, we have to correlate everything to the violence and murder, because murder is the only thing that we have where we have any solid stats. Everything else, crime is a measurement of police activity, is not a measurement of citizen activity. Everything we have other than murder, we have to imply and infer.
I know you know this isn't true. We have multiple ways to measure crime levels. It's not just police-generated data. That's what we get through like UCR metrics. But like we have like the National Crime Victimization Survey, the NCVS or whatever.
But you can't take as accurate. You can only infer things from it because of some of the proportions that are going on. Self-reported data is absolute trash.
I mean, all surveying is garbage. This is just
if self-reporting data is trash. Yeah.
Oh man.
You can act exasperated all you want, but when people are giving you their opinions on something or they're telling you what they did. So, for example, do you believe the self-reported data that studies that come out that say hundreds of thousands of gun self-defenses occur every year?
I've read those studies. I've read them contextualized, and they're not accurate.
It's fucking nonsense, right?
Yeah, it's nonsense.
Because it's self-reported, and it's people when they self-report, they're telling you.
No, that's not why that data is problematic, though.
Dude, I don't know what to tell you. It's not good data.
Well, it's not a good usage of data because they used a very small sample size. The NCVS doesn't have a small sample size. It has a pretty.
There are huge crime victimization surveys that take place over the entire nation with huge databases. Anything self-reported is bad, just like an eyewitness is the absolute worst piece of evidence.
Self-reporting data, when you're filling out like surveys or something, isn't necessarily bad. It's bad if the survey itself is bad. So the gun report survey, forgive me, I'm going to monologue here for a second, is for the self-defensive gun usage that a lot of like 2A nuts like trot out, is bad because it uses a small sample size and they ask very nebulous questions. Like they'll be like, have you ever used a gun in self-defense? Or something like that. And what that means isn't qualified well. So like, oh, like I had a gun and like I told someone I had a gun and that counts as an instance versus I pulled out my gun and I threatened someone versus I pulled out my gun and I shot someone, right? Those are all buckled into the same thing and they answer the questions in very vague ways. There's ways you can conduct surveys to get the data you want. I don't remember if they were reinterpreting data or if they did that original thing themselves, but that was a problem with that study. Not that like self-report surveys are necessarily bad or surveys that are self-administered are bad. It's just that like that one in particular had methodological issues that might have been motivated since I think, okay,
I understand, and I'm trying to tell you that whether you've been a victim or not is enough of a methodological error in thing. People seek to be victims. It's just what they do. It's not good data collection. It's not a good survey. You can, and that's fine, but we can, and I'm just telling you, I'm not even dismissing that what your point is to derive from them. I'm telling you that self-reported data, especially in the police world, is not good data. Would you trust the self-reported data from cops?
I would trust it with a grain of salt. That grain of salt being, I think cops tend to like downplay certain things or insert certain things into their narratives in order to make them more justifiable. For example, when they're trying to justify a stop after the fact, like, oh, I observed like furtive movements and I could see a bulge in their pants after they found a gun. In reality, they just shook someone down on the side of the street, hoped they found something. When they found something, they took it and then like justified it afterwards. There is stuff like that does happen, but the actual recordings of the stops probably are pretty close to like proximate in terms of the amount that are happening. For example, like New York stop and
what? You think they're close? You think cops report what percentage of their actual stops?
Uh, I probably it probably depends on jurisdiction and how much they care about it. So what I'm specifically thinking of is in the NYPD, their stop and frisk stuff, where at the height of it, I think there was 700 something thousand stops a year.
Dude, come on. Just what percentage do you think
I don't
cops?
know.
But you don't know. You just said you think it was close to 100%.
So I'd say it's probably 90+% of those stops are probably.
It's no chance it hits 10%.
So okay, by this rationale, you're telling me there wasn't 700,000 stops in New York City. There were 7 million stops. You think there were 7 million instances of stop and frisk?
At minimal. Okay. At minimal.
Oh my! I'm trying to think of like. Hold on, I'm trying to remember the numbers because they did like how many.
You don't know how policing works. You're explaining to me instead of sitting down and listening. I can explain to you how this actually works, how jump out crews work, how stop and frisk actually operates.
You bitched about Ferguson.
But
about being
already.
You worked in Baltimore for like 3-5 years. How long were you in Baltimore for?
11.
11. Oh, you're a pretty young looking guy. Congratulations. Time has been good to you.
Yeah, I made 400 arrests. How many did you make?
I made 0.
I was in a major case narcotics squad. I was literally a jump out boy doing the stop and frisk. Okay. What have you done?
I haven't done any of that because I'm not a sworn
officer. Right. So instead of thinking why don't you learn?
Because I'm not learning anything from you right now. You're just telling me.
You're not learning. I just explained
to you my personal experience in the city of Baltimore. Like, it's just clown shit, dude. You know this.
So you shit on me for policing is different in Baltimore than other places?
You literally said that to me when I cited the Ferguson study. You told me I can't generalize Ferguson to other departments, which is a fair criticism because policing is decentralized in this country to like city level and like even like multiple police departments occupying the same jurisdiction.
There are certain things you can't. For instance, in Baltimore, we don't do civil asset forfeitures. We just don't do it. We don't get the kickback. So that's one nuanced element.
That's not even.
But if you're talking about policing as a whole. I'm sorry, I can't hear you because every time I'm in the middle of a sentence, you're talking. So go ahead, let me hear you.
Okay, so that's probably not even true. Like, have you ever read Bradley Balco's book? It's actually quite interesting. Even when cities try and tamp down on like asset forfeiture, the problem is cities that can't really do that because while you can outlaw them locally and at the state level, the municipalities still partner with federal asset forfeiture and then receive stuff in through DA partnerships. So what you're saying is technically in Canada.
Again, you're explaining something to me that's children's knowledge.
Okay,
I understand the nuance of this, and I've been through the nuance because I've been the person doing it and supervising it. Why are you having a hard time with that?
I'm not having a hard time.
Do you want me to explain to you how any of these things in policing work? Policing is generally the same everywhere in the entire world.
That's a bold claim right there.
So Baltimore doesn't have civil asset forfeitures because we don't get a kickback as a police department. The incentive is not there, so we don't do it. And so you just said that you're trying to stop police departments from doing it. I'm telling you, we don't do it. You're calling me a liar? Go look it up. Baltimore.
I'm doing it right
now.
Yeah,
sure. They do when the feds come in, huh?
Like, remember that time I looked up the thing in the DOJ report and I was right? I'm willing to be wrong here too. But
what did you look up in the DOJ report that was right? Go ahead and tell me what you found.
That they were literally using their police department as revenue generation and targeting black communities. That's what I said.
Okay, you targeting black communities is the problem I'm objecting to.
How are you objecting to that problem? I mean, because I object to them doing that already. Too. I think revenue generation is bad. I think targeting black communities is bad. And I'm not even talking about just asset forfeiture.
I'm not saying that. What I clearly have said to you is that you cannot prove and document targeting the way that you're saying they're doing it. I'm asking you how they're proving that they targeted black people. Are they eliminating being in the proximity of violence? Are they eliminating the amount of violence in the area? Are they eliminating what the people asked the police officers to do? One thing that the vast majority of people from your standpoint and argument forget is that the 911 calls are coming from the community, and the vast majority of the community want the policing to do what they're doing. It's the extreme minority that's objecting.
Yeah, I agree with you. Most areas that experience high levels of crime do want policing in. What they want the police to do might be a little different than what the police are actually doing, but they're like, just dealing with crime.
Sure, but you need to eliminate those things first. So this come out and say, look, there's a correlate to a black community, and therefore they're targeting. That's very weak logic and just shitty scholarship. And the DOJ, another police department, should not be your source of police department info, as you've explained.
I didn't explain that. That's something that you said I shouldn't do that I disagreed with.
You said you take police data with police information with a grain of salt. So you just took a collection by reading that Ferguson report from the DOJ. You're taking a collection of police data and then thinking you have something relatively objective, and you don't.
I think it's something like you're just positing we can't ever have knowledge about this. How could you have knowledge
I
about
just
this?
explained to you how we can. We look at objective measurements. When you're pointing out a social construct and you're not eliminating the other barriers, for instance, this is one we talk to all the time. I've explained and I've laid out the data. If you've read the article, you would know how I lay out the data that black people are 16 times less likely to be killed by the police. Police do not respond to demographics, they respond to violence.
Yeah, I mean, I'll check your article out like another time. I didn't read an article. I watched you have 2 conversations. That was my research for this, 2 conversations, and took some notes. So I do apologize for not reading your article. I would have done that had I known it existed. I'll have one more question. We could move the topic a little bit to something hopefully maybe a little bit more productive. Do you think you could prove?
I don't understand what your point. I would like to understand your point though. Like, what is your point? So in Ferguson, by your theory, that they targeted black community with revenue generation, which would objectively be wrong. But so what? Like, what is your point behind that?
Well, that they have this social classification that they're using to target one group who represents probably social underclass, a group that is disfavored by the majority population there, who then target for revenue generation, probably relating to historical oppression, historical relationships between these 2 groups. Ferguson, Missouri, is a former slave state. I think it was one of the more brutal ones. I might be wrong about that. I'm not gonna die on that hill because I don't think it's particularly relevant. Most southern forms of slavery were pretty bad. But
what's our lesson? What are we gaining out of this? Policing and individuals have done terrible things throughout history. What are we gaining from it? What are we moving forward with?
Well, because we understand that police have this history of enacting racism at the behest of the state, local, and federal authorities. I shouldn't have said authorities there.
Right. So is revenue collection from Ferguson like your big piece of evidence that people should freak out about? Because I assure you, the world's not going to freak out about that.
Oh no! I mean, the world kind of did freak out about Ferguson, but okay.
No, I'm talking about the revenue generation from the DOJ report. What is your big issue like in modern policing now? What are we going to take away? What's our learning lessons? To just say that police have done bad things in the past is it's generally
not they're just doing bad things in the past. That they're still actively doing bad things and engaging in a system that perpetuates bad things. For example, like the cruelty in our the cruelty in our criminal justice system. The police act as the front line to that. The police aren't the only thing, but they are a bulwark in the whole system brutality that encompasses our criminal justice system. So you have the police who tend to enact violence, arrest people, tend to view these people in a pretty disfavorable manner. The whole war on crime, war on poverty, and all that tended to manifest in that way. And our criminal justice system never worked as a not that it never had. Since about the 1970s and 80s, we stepped away from rehabilitative justice in this country and moved more towards a retributive mode, where we say, oh, these people, committed a crime against society. Well, fuck them. And then we put them in jail for, years, decades, took away the right to vote, took away their employment opportunities, put them on registries and lists and all this shit. So we
sure, but did police departments do that? Hold on. I asked you what police do. You're telling me what society has done.
Sure. Well, I identified an issue with the whole criminal. My largest issue with Black Lives Matter. I think the bigger issue is the criminal justice system as a whole, of which the police represent the most frontline and most visceral problem in that. But the police do.
That's just not true. I mean, the police don't represent the criminal justice system. They represent the communities that they're serving.
That is not correct. It depends.
Those communities create all these laws and ask these police to do things. I have no idea what you're talking about. Name one community whose police department isn't doing exactly what the majority of the community is asking.
Let's see. That the majority of the community is, well, sure, but you can have the majority of the community in a case like Ferguson, where the majority of the community is white. The majority of the police are overwhelmingly white, but 30 to 40% of that city is black. I keep saying 34%. I'm not sure.
So you don't believe in democracy after all?
I do believe in democracy, but within confines. Do you not value a constitution, or we should have certain things that
I'm not a fan of democracy. Democracy is evil. Then the Constitution has nothing to do with democracy. So can you actually say something coherent?
Have nothing to do with democracy.
We don't live in a democracy, dude.
Oh God, yes we do. Representative democracies, republics.
We don't live in a representative democracy. We live in a constitutional republic.
What do you think that means?
It means that we protect minority rights and we actually do the exact opposite of democracy.
So how do we choose our government officials?
We vote through representatives.
What do we call voting?
You're talking about state politics. We're talking about the nation, right?
Federal politics, we do this for too. We vote in our House reps. We vote in senators. We didn't always do that, but we do it now. We vote for the president through, admittedly, a deeply flawed system, but we do. So,
I'm not really sure what you're saying. We don't.
You're saying we don't live in a democracy, but we live in a form of a democracy.
We vote for an electoral college who can vote for whoever they want.
Sort of. Depends on the state. They can technically, many of them can technically vote for that, but there are rules.
They're representatives. They have no need to listen to you. So because you voted in a representative democratically does not make it a democracy.
I have bad news for you. There was a Supreme Court ruling on this. States can enforce and replace electors to guarantee that their vote goes the way that the state law indicates. They can't act independently anymore.
That doesn't matter. They can in most places. I don't really know what you're talking about. They can act independently. I don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea what you're saying with that.
Sure. I mean, your ignorance.
But this is a constitutional republic. It is not a democracy. Democracies are mob rule where the majority wins.
Sure. If you adopt that very rigid definition of a democracy, this is not a democracy. But most people don't functionally use that definition of democracy because it's very silly.
Okay, man. Can you define democracy then?
Sure.
So black people are people that just have a certain amount of dark skin, which you won't define. And what is a democracy?
Democracy is a system where you either vote on laws or representative officials who enact the will of the people. So
we had a democracy during slavery?
Well, you have some form of democracy, but not a very encompassing one, like enfranchisement. To what extent that the vote is enfranchised is something worth considering, and how much something is a democracy, right? If you only let, like, the
I'm sorry, man. Can you just move on to the next question? The idea that we're arguing that this isn't a constitutional republic is just beyond beneath me.
It's a constitutional republic, but a constitutional republic is a form of a democracy. Well, you're right. This is an exceedingly stupid point. The question I wanted to ask before we got distracted was, how would you determine if something is racially motivated? Or do you think that's something that we can't actually determine? Is that knowledge?
You can never understand intent, but you could find certain things to infer.
Sure, you can't yeah, okay. Yeah, I agree with you. So, for example, let's just use the Ferguson thing as an example. How would I prove that there's a racialized element here? Could you do that? What would be the metric you'd use to prove that? You said we don't sufficiently have that. Maybe we do, maybe we don't.
Sure. I mean, no, you've already demonstrated that there's a correlate, a disproportional correlate. That's.
Well, yeah, screw the correlate, right? I want to ask you
But it's disproportional to demographics, which is a dishonest disproportion measurement.
Sure, but you can even go to drug enforcement or something, right? Where you can have usage rates compared to arrest rates or something.
Sure,
which are disproportionate even compared to usage. And penal and
right, but that's not what anybody's. I mean, if you want to do that, but that's not what we're talking about in Ferguson. But with most things, you'd be able to find a disproportionate correlate with drug usage versus arrest. Again, you're relying on self-reported data, and I'm just not impressed by self-reported data.
Do you think so we can say there could be an issue with self-reported data, but do you think there'd be a significant issue between these two groups that I guess you think don't exist, right? We have self-identified black people, self-identified white people, self-reported amount of drugs that they use, understood under.
So now the black people and white people can self-report?
Yeah, on a survey, that's what you do. You self-report on a survey.
Right, so when you're comparing them to who the police enforce, so on one side you have the police determining who the race is, and on the other side of the data you have the subject determining what their race is, and now you're comparing them, and you don't see why I object.
Do you think that those numbers are going to be completely different? Do you think
Yeah.
I would say that 98% of people who identify as black are going to be treated and identified as black by those outside of them?
Yeah, maybe by people with your mentality, sure.
By literally everybody. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, man, you don't get to say that about me, so fucking move on.
I do. You're not immune to the society we grew up in. I don't know what to tell you.
Move on, dude.
But I don't think you answered this question. What metric would we use to determine if they're specifically targeting someone on race? Could we do that?
No, it's because race is a social construct.
Also, like chattel slavery in the South, right? The one that we imported from the Caribbean islands, which was explicitly along racial lines. So slavery did have white slaves. I will clarify that because I'm sure you would have mentioned this anyway. The original slave colonies had white slaves, had black slaves. They didn't really care. It was much more class based. But the southern slavery, the cotton plantations, was imported from the Caribbean and was much more rigidly along racial lines, not so much class lines. But obviously, they're both slave based societies. So my question would be, how did they know these people were black? When they were like,
I don't know what you're trying to say. I mean, what do you haven't determined black? So you said they determined it because their skin was sufficiently dark to some ubiquitous measurement. Sure.
Yeah, they had very listen, people are stupid. Don't get me wrong. Everyone's stupid. Do I think race is a worthless characteristic in an empirical sense? Yeah, it's not like super useful, but understanding it as a social construct is something that can yield value, which is the only reason I care about it.
It's not something that can yield value. You can only continue the racism. You're just continuing the racism. That's all you're doing. To be anti-racist is, I know you guys think you're doing something, but you're just being racist.
So
define racist then. Define a racist action.
Define a racist action or define racism?
Yeah, what is a racist action?
So I think there's different types of racism.
Dude, these definitions, if you're on a topic and you want to confront me about it, you need to fucking be ready with some definitions or something. You need to know a basic idea of what we're talking about.
I have a pretty basic idea of what we're talking about here. So if I say, what is a racist action? An action taken against another person on the basis of their perceived race.
Perceived by the aggressor?
I would say a negative action taken towards someone. Based on
negative is extremely extremely subjective. You get that, right?
Sure.
So your definition of negative is not someone else's definition of negative. So who's defining negative for the greater societal understanding?
Well, I think we would just have to have like some sort of consensus agreement on what is a negative action. You know, me beating the shit out of someone or lynching them based on this perceived characteristic is a pretty bad thing. Me, you know,
but those are crimes.
Yes, yeah, that's a crime. There's nothing to do with anything. If you're targeting someone based on those characteristics, that is a racist action. I didn't say it has to be a crime or not a crime.
Right, and how? So you're saying if someone has the intent that they're doing something because they have categorized them into it. So could Sean King be a victim of a hate crime because someone classified him as black and beat him up?
Yeah, sure. If they perceived him as black and then did it because
do you think a court and a jury would take seriously that Sean King was beat up because he was black? A dude that's 52 shades lighter than me.
I mean, it depends on like the interviews and shit. Like you just told me they did it because he's black. If the person acted assuming Sean King was black, it's not hard to figure out Sean King if you think that's
possible.
Do I think it's possible?
I'm asking you if you think that's possible.
Yeah, I do think that's possible. Why wouldn't that be possible?
Okay, so philosophically and in all my evidence, if you want to read my book, Crimes and Punishments in the 21st Century, I go through all of this, but there is no free will. And there simply is no, and violence is a biological malfunction. If you're talking about aggression, we're talking about entirely different topics. So violence is a biological malfunction that's vastly more correlated to things like inequality, lead poisoning, environmental poisonings, things like the actual police themselves are a source of violence, but local instability, fatherless homes, things like that are vastly more correlated.
With, yeah, sure.
But violence.
But yeah, okay, you have like a policy. So we can intertwine.
Right. So somebody can say I killed them because they're black, but the truth is that's never actually the truth. Well, violence is a biological malfunction. They had a version of temporary insanity, unless you're talking about aggression, which is more coordinated war. Somebody coming after you, something like that.
If you think it's all biological malfunction, how can you justify putting anyone in jail or prison?
Oh, I don't. I think you have to separate them from society, but the idea that you thought I justified that is incorrect.
Well, I mean, you worked as a cop for 11 years where you admitted to arresting 400 people.
I evolved.
Oh, yeah, that's fair. Hey, everyone grows. Props to you. So do you think we shouldn't have prisons or jails?
I think you have to have something that separates people from society, but that doesn't mean it needs to be punitive by any means.
Yeah, okay, I guess we agree on that. I actually don't believe in like retributive justice like at all, like pure rehabilitation, and like to whatever
Me
extent
neither.
that means. Yeah. Cool. I never encountered someone else who has that similar perspective, because it sounds really fringe, and I feel like we explain it, it makes more sense. It's like, like people like Anders Breivik. It's like, yeah, the motherfucker's got to stay the fuck out of society, But for most people, like Anders Breiviks are very uncommon. Sorry if, to anyone who might be watching this, or I assume you probably know who Anders Breivik is, but he's the guy who did that shooting in Norway. He went to an island and slaughtered like 60-something children on an island for some like right-wing white nationalist weird thing. But yeah, like people like that need to be like kept out of society, but it shouldn't be because like we hate them and they need harm. It's just because like you're dangerous and like we can't have you running around.
You're just protecting everybody else.
Yeah,
totally.
exactly. But it should never be done out of like malice. So how do we agree on that?
Right, and you got to
guess I didn't
understand,
really
especially
think
when
we
you say
would.
the police. If I knew what the criminal justice system entailed as a cop, I would have had second thoughts about it. What you got to, when you're saying like the cops are the front lines of the criminal justice system, it's not the way policing works. Cops go to work, they do their job, they don't see the prison, they don't see what happens afterwards, they don't see the court process. I mean, that's part of the deceit of the whole thing.
Yeah, like a little bit. It depends on the system you work in. You work for a police department. If you work for like a sheriff's office, like I'm in Jacksonville, Florida. So our police department is a sheriff's office that covers the whole county. They also operate the jails. So a lot of the officers worked in the jails before being able to go on parole. So it does.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, man. But the dude like me that runs out and going through houses chasing guns and drugs will never end up seeing that side. We won't. That's way beneath us.
Sure, but that's just because you were in Baltimore instead of Jacksonville. If you're in Jacksonville.
No. I'm telling you, if I was SWAT team in Jacksonville, I would never work in the prison. I would never know.
Up. Like you can't just apply to be on SWAT like out the gate.
I've never seen a police department like that. Maybe your sheriff's like that. But usually,
I could be incorrect. I'm not an expert on SWAT, so
when you join the sheriff's department, like going into the jail portion is an assignment, like going into any other assignment. And I would never apply for such a thing.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I agree with you. I wouldn't do that either. Let's see. Actually, okay, so I guess like I'll explain a position I have, and I'll hear some pushback because I don't usually talk about this a whole lot. You can tell me why you think I'm wrong or why you think it's not valuable. So, for example, I'm not like full into like critical race theory or whatever. I take concepts that I think are useful for understanding phenomenon, and I apply them if they seem useful and have explanatory value. That's pretty much it. If a concept seems useful, I take it. And if it doesn't, I throw it the fuck away. That's about it. So, as far as critical race theory goes, I've come across some concepts that I found useful in explaining phenomenon. For example, color blindness, something that you think you ascribe to some degree or another, that many people in society do seem to ascribe to, where we just shouldn't acknowledge race at all and shouldn't understand it. However, I'll just leave it at like Reagan. They use this idea of attacking attacking welfare programs. Whether you support them or not, it's irrelevant, but attacking welfare programs along racial lines without explicitly saying race. Like, these undeserving people, the famous line of like, Tyrone's eating T-bone steaks while you're eating hamburgers. And then they had that welfare queen that he identified, which was like that one lady from Chicago who had like 13 kids from like 11 different fathers or something weird like that. And so understanding how people conceive of race and how those emotions can be invoked upon, even if it is a social construct, and then be used to push policy notes, I think is important for understanding how rhetoric works in terms of like policies and politics and how things get enacted. So I guess what's the problem with me trying to use something like a critical race lens of color blindness to understand how a welfare program that white people benefit from, overwhelmingly so, was able to be attacked along these not explicitly but implicitly racial lines through dog whistles.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the concept that especially if you're a scholar or you're trying to be somebody that's understanding an issue, especially since any issue you're understanding is always in the past. It's something that happened before, and you're trying to contextualize what was going on there. I thoroughly understand that. I have two huge problems. One, if you're just not studying it and you're going out in the world and you're talking about it, it's exactly like suicide or other things. So one phenomenon about suicide is the more you talk about suicide, the more people commit suicide, because we have no free will, and everything that we are and everything that we know is something that was taught to us through other human beings. And the more you discuss race, you categorize people by race, and then inadvertently, subconsciously, and unavoidably, people will treat people differently when they're in different categories. So now, well, should males and females be treated differently? Maybe not. But unavoidably, those labels are objective, and we're going to have to deal with some of the discrimination that.
That's actually a really great point. I completely agree with that. I think, funny enough, I actually didn't think you. I guess I should read more of your stuff, but most people I don't think subscribe to like a complete what's it called, like free will doesn't exist, being a determinist in that nature, which I am as well. And that people are just learn the things that they're taught throughout society, which I completely agree. But just mentioning race isn't teaching people negative things about race. It might just be teaching them that this is a social category that exists, and here's how we should understand these concepts differently.
No, you're not understanding. Yeah. All socially constructed categories are wrong because you are enabling, creating, and furthering the discrimination, because all labels will end in discrimination. Some labels cannot be avoided. Gender and fucking race can be completely avoided because they're not real. Mm-hmm. So the longer you go, it's just like a black parent growing up telling their kids that the police department is going to come after them, and they create this demon of the police department when the reality is that a police officer is vastly less likely to kill the kid because he's black. Mm. So I understand that we need to look at these things, and when scholars like me are out there and we're doing the data and we're trying to explain why things are happening, sure, you have to say it. But if you'll notice in all my writings, I say, look, if you're going to live by the social construct of black and race and everything else, then this is what's happening. But I do not subscribe to this, and this worldview is absolutely wrong. The worldview itself is racist.
So I guess the issue I'm having here is like I'm not gonna. I feel like you're at best nonpartisan. I think you.
Not at all. I'm not partisan in the fucking.
I don't think you. I feel like you don't like either side. Yeah. I agree somewhat as well. I'm pretty left leaning, but I don't really like either party. I kind of like lesser two evils type deal.
Generally, I'm way farther left than the vast majority of people, but they don't really like swallowing that pill of what it really means, because I'm attacking some people's personal identity. Yeah. If you think these certain things, I'm telling you that what you fundamentally believe is wrong, and you're wrong for doing it. And I think as much as you mean help by talking about racial disparities and bringing these topics about, I think you further them and part of the problem unavoidably.
So,
and I'm doing it right now. So the only way I can even talk about it is just to object.
It's a catch-22, right? Fuck. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Actually, what's funny, that goes into the thing. Have you ever read? If you're familiar with this, you maybe have. It's a pretty well-known book, I guess. It's called Dog Whistle Politics by Ian Haney Lopez. If not,
I've heard of it, but I'm not a fan of anything that's a dog whistle, because the only person that hears a dog whistle is a fucking dog.
I ran into that line somewhere else recently. I called a dog.
I'm sorry, if you're the one that's saying, oh my God, look, they're talking about black people, because that's what you fucking think.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I'm sorry. It's just like that lady who wrote the racist book. Like, I'm like, yo, D'Angelo, whatever her name is.
It is hot garbage. Oh man. Oof.
Like, yeah, I mean, you feel that way. You're a racist, but don't fucking put that on me.
Oh yeah, she's an odd one. Man, that book did so much damage to anything vaguely left leaning. Still. I hate that book so much. It is profoundly. She makes some interesting things in like the beginning. It's like, okay, like I kind of get what you're saying there, and then like in the last half of that book, she's just like completely unbearable, just like ridiculous things. Like I'm very like systems focused, and she's just like, well, the other way we could fix racism is if you individually acknowledge you are a racist, and then you just try and fix that in yourself. That's how we do it. It's like you just try to sell your fucking self-help class. You don't piece of shit. Totally. Like, I see what you're doing here. This doesn't actually fix fucking problems. I do not like you, Robin D'Angelo.
You just brought up a good point about being systems focused. So I am extremely systems focused. I believe in process over outcome in every single way, shape, and form. Focus on the process, on the process, on the process. And the vast majority of police discussions in the general public are obsessed with outcomes. Yeah. And you're always going to have bad outcomes in policing, because it's just a human interaction. There's always going to be a certain level of bad outcomes. But what can we do to improve the processes so that we minimize the odds of those bad outcomes?
Yeah. I think we need to take outcomes into account, not effect. But they're used to like hone a process or hone a system. Like if you
Exactly.
see it like, oh, I introduced like, let's just do like voting ID laws or something, and I see like, oh, that affects like 5 times more black people than does white people. Okay, well, let's do something. Maybe we don't get rid of voter ID laws. Maybe we make sure that like IDs are free and like handed out like your local, like, I don't know, like mayor's office or something. Right?
Absolutely. I find the most times people say there's a hurdle, the hurdle is very extremely easy to solve.
Yeah, my issue when I argue about that is that like, well, the hurdle's the reason the law exists, right? They're using it for a specific reason. Because as is disproportionate effect to gain a political edge, but we don't need to go down that topic. It's unrelated, or not unrelated, but tangentially related. So I guess like my problem is I don't know how to like solve this problem. So let's go back to the dog whistle. I know you said you don't like it, but we're gonna have to talk about it for a couple of minutes here. So are you familiar with the oh man, how am I forgetting it? The Willie Horton ad.
The what?
It's a pretty famous example of dog whistling. It's the Willie Horton ad. It was ran in the 1988 campaign for George H.W. Bush. It was basically like I feel like watching it would be good. Whatever. It's like a quick like 20-30 second ad. I'd recommend checking out sometime later. Basically, it was like an ad that the H.W. Bush campaign ran, and it basically was like, oh, this is Willie Horton, the governor Dukakis released him, and then he raped and murdered a white woman. This is Dukakis on crime, right? Now, is that racist? They didn't mention race in it. They showed a picture of Willie Horton, who's black, and it's tinted. It's a tinted photo, so he looks even more black than he probably was. And then they're talking about how this black man was released by this governor, and then he murdered and raped a white woman on his like weekend
Yeah, I know
pass.
the story now.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're saying like I see the dog whistle, so I'm the racist person there, right? Maybe, but there's a whole lot of people who just go through. I don't know. You can say that. I mean, I'll disagree. But what I'm saying is, I know how people respond to that, right? I mean, you're probably familiar with someone with like the tropism of like, these sexually deviant black men, when we release them from bondage in the South, are going to like rape white women all the time, right? This is something rooted in American like or does that not ring a bell? I mean, that's like a
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. My argument is still you're basing your position in demographics, which is just
sure. But my issue here is like, so we have the George H.W. Bush campaign putting that message out there that's appealing to these.
But you're saying that that's a dog whistle, and I don't understand. If you were going to flip a quarter about who the suspect was that killed somebody, it's going to come up black more than white. You know that, right?
Well,
so like
no,
literally, it's
most crime is wait, am I saying this right? Intraracial?
I didn't say crime. I said violence.
Yeah, sure.
Interfamiliar. Most violence and crime is interfamiliar.
Yeah, sure. So most black people are killing black people. Most white people are killing white people. Right?
That's not what I said, though.
Yeah, sure. I'm just clarifying that, right? Like you're saying,
Yes.
most black people are going to be the ones committing violence, like proportionally. Okay, fine, whatever for murder.
No, they commit 53% of all murders.
It depends on the year, but close enough.
No, it doesn't depend on the year. It's been over 50% for decades.
It's like, I might be thinking of the raw violent crime rate. Whatever. It's
again, I don't care about crime. Crime is a measurement of police activity.
Yeah. So my point there
crime is how many times a police officer wrote a report. Murders, we have solid numbers on. 53% of murders are committed by black people. So if you're going to say, hey, look, they used a black guy to show a murder, it's literally most likely the case.
Well, but they're talking specifically about a black man who murdered and raped a white woman.
I mean, I get it. So now so if they would have used a black victim, you would be okay with that?
Well, that wouldn't serve their purpose, right? Like the purpose is to
according to your projection, I understand. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take your emotions out of it.
Their campaign literally admitted to doing this. Like this is
I don't care. I don't care. I hear what you're saying, and they can be trying. Right, but they can be doing something because they are doing the same thing that you're doing. They think other people will respond this way.
Wait, and people do respond this way. But they do respond
I understand. I get what you're saying.
That is associated with like a
do you not get the circle?
Swing.
Can you see the circle that I'm trying to describe to you? So you're saying that they think this about other people. You're saying it's true because you think other people will think this. They're saying it's true because they think other people will say this. And you're all in subjective opinionation that's not actually falling on objective measurements of anything. I understand you're all wrong about what other people think. I get that.
But I'm wrong about what other people think?
You guys are throwing out opinions and we're wrong.
Wait, what opinion am I throwing out?
That's what the people would think. I just
Yeah,
explained it to you.
people
So
do
you're saying that
act on
other
those
people would hear
biases.
that. So when you
Yeah.
just said to me that a black man was let out of prison and ended up raping a white woman, I think these fucking bitch ass liberal district attorneys.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm not hearing what you're hearing.
That's
This
not.
is your worldview.
Yeah. Well, this is not my worldview. This is me and
But you're
interacting.
projecting it onto others.
That's
That's my
not me. This
problem.
is me talking about a historical event, a strategy, a
No,
political strategy
dude,
used
you
for
just said that
decades.
you hear the dog whistle, and even if
Because
you don't
I
feel that way,
study
you
this.
know
What?
other people feel that way.
Yeah,
You
you
said that.
study things you see. So I'm telling you, other people feel this way because other people acted on this, like in response to these ads, in response to dog whistles that invoke unconscious biases that people harness by
No,
growing up
you
in
don't
society.
know that their unconscious bias wasn't something else. This is my problem. You're projecting your beliefs onto
You
this. So
said
when
you said
I
before.
went out into the real world. When I was on the streets protesting with Black Lives Matter, I was on the actual streets with real protests, with real people doing the whole thing. I was told one big issue is that people like me needed to go talk to white conservative America because we could understand and we could communicate with them. And I did that. I traveled 28 different states just visiting white areas and talking to people and doing as much as I could. And you know what? I didn't find any of the racism. I didn't find these beliefs. I heard cultural beliefs. I heard things about behavior. I did not hear things about
Well, but
people
that cultural
being
belief
black.
is a collective view on a group of people who they think have a bad culture that predisposes them to bad
Right,
actions
but
or violence or
they
whatever.
call OJ a thug just as much as they call Eminem a thug. It's not race.
I can't believe. I don't know if I've ever heard anyone
I know
call
you
Eminem a
can't believe
thug.
it because you
No, no,
haven't gone
no,
out there
no.
and had these
I don't know if I've
conversations.
heard anyone call it. Like, I grew up in a pretty suburban white area. I don't know if I've ever heard anyone call Eminem a thug. I mean, it probably has happened. I don't think he really even played
I
the
mean,
thug thing. He played the
okay.
mommy issue thing. But
What's the word wigger
I
mean?
what? Dude,
Wigger. What does wigger mean?
white nigger?
Okay. So what is that? That's somebody who's white who's acting in the black culture, right?
Yeah, sure.
Right. So people in West Virginia who are the royal suburban people that everybody, the white, whatever, the old school white people that just as a generalization out there, they see Eminem, they see the wigger the same as the nigger. There's no difference. They don't care. It's cultural. It's active. It's the way you behave. Like people that say, "Oh, I've been pulled over by the cops 50 times because I'm black." For one, I don't believe you because I hardly could ever tell who was actually driving the car, whether they were white, black, or had a hood on or anything like that. I have to get close and figure it out later on. Usually, I didn't know until I actually approached the vehicle.
Hey, you saw the hoodie in the Snapple can. You went at him. Moved on. No, I'm just
Yeah, the felony forest, the smelling things in the trees or something like that. I mean, sure, we pulled over cars, that you would generalize as a black car. But
Yeah.
I mean, like, it
Did you
doesn't,
see the
it's not
podcast?
what people are thinking. It's because of the car. It's because of the style. It's not because it could be a black person. It's just not what's happening.
Um, hold on. We got off the beaten path here. There's something I wanted to drill into. Hold on. So when I look at like something like the dog whistle used in that like campaign as just one example, and I could see how that's moved public opinion on a thing they care about, right? About order, about the safety of like white women. That's tapping into this thing you said before. People learn culturally. We're
Yeah,
deterministic.
but to
We
sit
learn
there
things
and
in culture.
what you're kind of trying to say is that a girl crossing the street because males are approaching her is has an unrealistic bias or she's sexist.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's an objective fear. That is something you can place on reality. Now, if it's white guys versus black guys approaching you, and you have some idea thinking the black guys are more dangerous because they commit 53% of the murders, you're not racist. I'm sorry.
Um, yeah, but that's not what I'm talking. Okay, so like this fear of like black men going out and raping white women is just not like a statistically significant thing. Agreed or disagreed? Or when I say statistically significant, I mean compared to black men raping black women or white men raping
Yeah,
white
it is
women.
at least hundreds of times more prevalent than white men raping black women.
You think it's 100 times more prevalent that
Hundreds of times more prevalent.
black men rape white women over white men raping black women? that about right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know
Yep.
those numbers off the top of my head. Hundreds of times.
I mean,
Sounds
you can go
not
look them up when
likely,
you get a
but
chance. It's not a big
yeah,
deal.
like I said, I don't know that off the top of my head, but if we're talking about small enough numbers, like we both agree that there's not a large coalition of black men running around raping white women.
Yeah, man, I got a 16-year-old daughter. I don't give a fuck about what you think its rarity is.
I'm just asking.
I'm just telling you emotionally, I wouldn't care. So
We're
it has
talking,
nothing to do with anything.
but that's what I'm, actually, if anything, that supports my point, right? This belief that like black men are just.
He could have said it was a white guy. He could have said it was an Asian guy. He could have said it was anybody. It's irrelevant. It's only relevant to you.
So it's not only relevant to me. I'm specifically not talking about how I give a shit about this. I'm talking about
between
the
conversation of me and you. It doesn't have any bearing on me. So you don't get to put those things on me.
I'm not putting anything on you. I haven't put anything on you.
Yeah, you are.
You're
putting out that this thing would be a dog
graduate
whistle.
degrees in criminal justice, okay? Attempting to talk about like how dog whistles were used in like the very recent past. This is not a long time. It was the 1988 election I'm talking about. There's more recent instances that we could talk about as well.
Right, dogs for dog whistles. I fucking explained this to you. You're not listening to me. You don't understand
dog whistles then. Like, I'm sorry. Like, the dog whistle's not.
You're saying it changed. Listen, you're saying they said this dog whistle. You're labeling it as a dog whistle. And then you're saying the evidence is, and the problem is how it changed public opinion. But if I'm the person in the public opinion who thought it was irrelevant that they said a black person, and I don't care about anyone raping a woman was the issue that was hitting my head, you're saying that I'm agreeing and my swaying is because of this dog whistle, and you just are wrong. You don't get to make those conclusions.
I almost
it's not difficult what I'm saying, bro.
No, I don't know what to say to this. Sure, let's go over it again. Because I'm telling you that people, this is something you agree with. People are deterministic, generally speaking. You know, either hard determinist or the compatibilist or something. And to that respect, they don't generally have free will. You grow up in a society where you consume media that portray people or black people in a negative light. Like I was born in '89, and you know, shows like Law and Order in the '90s, movies and shit generally did not portray black people in a very positive light. Would you agree with that sentiment, or would you disagree with that sentiment?
I mean, I got no idea. I mean, I grew up in the 90s, and we didn't live in this worldview where we were just, I mean, we watched black TV all day long.
I didn't think about it in the 90s either. I was like 10 years old in 1999, okay? I didn't think about this. It was just something I was surrounded by. And as I'm older and as I learn more about this, I can think about, how were the media portraying black people in the 90s or the 80s or whatever.
You're saying you were surrounded by it, but I literally was not. I have no idea what you're talking about. You were subjected to this.
Did you? No.
I didn't watch Law and Order. I watched Cops. I watched Knight Rider. I watched Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I watched we watched 50% of the shows we were watching when I was growing up were black shows. We had black suspects. We had black superheroes. This is all fabricated nonsense.
What black superheroes were there when we were growing up?
Blade?
Oh man, I meant to say.
Would you like more? Blade. Storm? I mean. Yeah. What are you talking about? Just because you don't know them, because you didn't live those worlds, you don't get to project that onto other people.
Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, one of the things that people are getting not excited, but happy about is that there's more positive portrayals of like black people in like movies. For example, like Black Panther having a black superhero where the entire society is based around black people. Black
See, I love that you bring this up. So Black Panthers, the fucking Wakandans are essentially Nazi Germany, and you think that's a positive image of black people. See, this is a big part of my issue. I think everything's lost. I think it's fucking nonsense. It is not Nazi disproportional. Germany? When I grew up, I'm telling you, 50% of the shows were black shows that we were watching. That's dramatically disproportional. Black people are only 13% of the population. It's extremely disproportional right now. And I understand the media can be excited about it, and a bunch of ultra liberals can be excited about it. But I mean, go woke, go broke is a real fucking thing.
What is go woke, go broke? I don't even know what that means.
I mean, it's when a company starts doing these kind of things. When Disney tries to make Rey fucking this superhuman female, when you the Marvel character, like all of these things, when you are making a black Spider-Man who acts exactly like Peter Parker, these are condescending nonsense.
You're talking about movies that made hundreds of millions of dollars. Like, how are you saying they go broke? Disney made hundreds of millions of dollars.
Like the NFL. Like the NFL.
Are they doing fine? And what do
They've
they go
lost
woke
viewership.
about?
All sports have lost viewership like crazy
Yeah, but
because they
that's
started promoting all this shit.
not.
I mean, you
No,
got
hold on, you
NFL
can't prove that.
millionaires
You
sitting here
can't prove
talking
that
about how they're.
causally.
You got a LeBron James saying he's afraid to leave the house. That's a fucking joke, man. The image of black people being that weak is kind of gross to me.
So you can say that, and like I know that's like a talking point, like, oh, people stop watching the NFL because they let their people kneel for the flag or whatever the fuck it is. It's like, okay, there's like, if you show me like some sort of study on that, I would love to see it, because I haven't seen anything. Like, sports viewership has been declining over time anyway. Like, it just has.
Okay, man, I don't really care. Just move on.
Like, okay. Trying to run over this dog whistle thing again, because we just keep getting stuck at the same fucking spot on this. I don't even know what to say.
No,
Like,
because you are taking your worldview and you're putting it onto other people, and I'm telling you it's immoral and it's wrong.
This has nothing to do with my worldview. I'm talking about people responding to stimuli in a way that we can fucking measure. It is not that
you're
grossly
talking about
complicated.
people responding to a stimuli in a way that fits your narrative. I literally just explained to you how somebody could be, what you're classifying as being the changed part of the population from the dog whistle, could be changed through entirely different things that aren't what you're projecting onto them.
Yeah. I mean, you're just making shit up, and that's a great defense to when I make a point. When you just like throw shit at the wall and hope something sticks. That's great. But
I have no idea what you're talking about. You explained.
You're just like, well, it could be this, that, or the other thing. Maybe the black people had their drugs hanging out of their pants. Like, what do I give a shit? Like, you're just making something like, this study could have been flawed in this way, that way, the other thing. Anyone can conjecture or make up conjecture on why a given study could be wrong and just blow stuff up out of your ass. Like, come on now, it's a ridiculous thing to do.
No, you made up their intent. I explained how their intent can be something else. I am not making up
their intent. The intent of the people who did this is very well documented, from Ronald Reagan launching his campaign in I want to say Kenosha. It's not Kenosha.
I'm not objecting as much to their intent as I am to the general population that you said was changed.
Okay, fine. So we know that their intent
and I've explained that.
Sure, we know their intent was to do this. Now, just to quickly explain dog whistling, I don't just mean like I see a symbol like the OK sign, and then a certain group of people recognize it, like, oh cool, they're white nationalists, which can be a thing. That is one element of dog whistling. But there's another type of dog whistling where you say something that invokes a buried sentiment that people have now, that they then act upon, that they might not be fully aware of. In this case,
how are you identifying things that the people aren't aware of?
They did this. So the way they came across the Southern strategy, I guess, and using like racial, I don't want to say racial bribes, but like racial dog whistling in order.
Dude, you're not listening to what I'm saying at all. How are you measuring in the study why someone moved their opinion?
Well, you can. I don't remember the exact thing. I read the book a while ago.
You can't, man. It's obvious that you can't.
Yes, you can. You could say, oh.
Let me know when you get your PhD and learn how to fucking do research.
You can record people's stimulus in response. You can record stimulus in response to people's reactions to given ads and say like, "Oh, did you find this ad striking? Did you find it racist? Did you do this?" Like, there's literally studies where they did this. You can record people's fine. Responses.
We're not talking about those studies. We're literally talking about dog whistling and the intent behind the dog whistling. And if people are again being asked to self-report, you're relying on the weakest of data that exists.
I mean, I guess we fundamentally disagree that surveying isn't a form of data generation, in spite of it being fairly accurate and repeatable. But okay, I guess it's just repeating wrong in the same exact way every single time. I don't know what to say to that.
Yeah, of course people will. If you ask them certain questions, of course, I understand that surveys can be done very well with targeted ways, but these are not the surveys, the data that you're pulling out. I have seen surveys that were done very well. I have. But this is not what you're talking about. You're talking about these mass generalizations that don't have that kind of data. To have the kind of data you're talking about, you have to have the small population base for an intimate interview that you dismissed because the population bases were too small, which is wrong, but that's fine.
So they're doing something that they think is going to have a racialized impact, and then they win.
So says you.
No, so says them. You already agree with me that you think they are consciously doing this, and then it works in the way that they anticipated it working, and then they repeated that for 30 years successfully. So I'm asking you. This is
if you say so, but what I'm telling you is when you call something a dog whistle, the people who hear dog whistles are fucking dogs.
That's a great one-liner. It's wonderful. Here I am.
I mean, it's literally the point of the term, dude.
So when I say hear a dog whistle, I'm talking about acting on it, I guess, where these people respond to the stimuli received in a way
Right.
that is predictable.
If you blow a dog's
Me
whistle and the dog doesn't
understanding
hear
it,
you, it's irrelevant. We're only talking about
yeah.
movement, of
So
course.
me understanding that dog whistle means I'm a dog
You
responding.
don't understand that dog whistle. You're assuming and you're projecting your preconceived narratives.
You're just disagreeing with like 50 years of American history. That's pretty like
Yeah, I disagree with the vast majority of things. Do you understand that that's what science is? Science is a collection of things that are wrong, not things that are correct.
A little bit of both, but sure, things can be reevaluated over time. But
No,
like you have not made
no,
a
there
strong
are no
argument
scientific laws. Negative. There are no scientific laws.
Okay.
None. Science is a collection of things that are not true, not things that are true. Period. And you make these claims about things that are true. That's unscientific and arrogant and patently false. And my version of what I see as arrogant ass liberal white people doing the same shit Malcolm said they would. Yep, that's what I see.
Am I the arrogant white person doing whatever?
Of course.
For what? How dare
you?
How dare you assume I'm white? I am an Italian. Okay, we are not culturally white. All right. I'll have you know, I was disowned by white nationalists. I have nowhere to go. No one will take me.
This is what I hear. This is what I hear, and you're not saying anything different.
I don't know. I guess we're getting to a point where this conversation is no longer. Well, let me see if I have interest.
Right. So what do you want to do? You want to treat black people differently? You think they're pathetic? You think they can't help themselves?
I never said that.
So what do you want to do? I'm asking.
What would I want to do? What policy I support? So I like colorblind approaches in terms of policies we enact. For example, I want to help people who are poor. And I know as a result of that, I will end up helping more black people than I do white people on a.
Not true.
What? No, sorry. Like in a representative level, not like in a raw number.
So we're going back to the. So
Wait,
you're going to help a disproportionate amount of white people versus black people. So you're very interested in helping black people disproportionately.
Well, I just want to help. Wait, hold on. I want to help everyone who's impoverished. I don't care what fucking color you are. I want to help people achieve material
that's
conditions.
A statement I can fucking work with.
I do, but in order to do this, I have to understand how racial narratives are used to undermine that goal. That's why I talk about that.
Why? How? Give me one example of why you would need to know that.
Because the major gutting of the social safety net happened underneath Reagan, who justified.
No. Give me an example of modern day policy development of why you would need to know that.
A modern day policy development, why I would need to know.
Yeah, you're trying to make a policy in 2021 or change something.
Oh, sure.
Time,
you still, I think you. Hold on. Let me consult my notes for a second. I think you even made this point somewhere. Fuck it, I don't care. I'll just ask you the question. Or I'll just make the statement. You can tell me. So, for example, saying like I don't like giving people my money for whatever. Oh, actually, yeah, you made this point like a Scandinavian person who comes to the country and then they have to give them like they were discriminated against because Italian, Scandinavian people. Wait, Scandinavian? No, I didn't mean Scandinavian. I meant Slavic. That's what I meant.
No, I was saying Slovenia.
Yeah, that's what I meant. I just swapped the words. Came here. Why should they be paying for like racial mishaps of the past or something like that when they were both treated like shit? To an extent, I agree because I don't really care about that. I just want people to do better.
To an extent, what extent don't you agree with that?
Well, I guess I just do agree with that.
Okay,
that's just a way of saying that. I don't know. I did. Sometimes I just talk and I just use words and nothing means anything. It's just how I feel. Yeah, I don't. My goal is never to like punish someone for just like, oh, you're white. It's sort of like, okay, I want to help people who are poor, who are worse off, and like due to historical reasons, we have black people who are more worse off than white people in this country. I think, in one of those.
That's a claim, man. That's a claim that I just can't subscribe to.
It depends where you go in the country, right? So like Appalachia,
you're saying because of historical reasons, and you're dismissing what happened with Jews, what happened with the Japanese here. You're dismissing what happens with Native Americans.
Well,
I just don't buy it, man.
These are complex interactions that we can explain, but like I didn't feel like I doubt.
No, we can explain the excuses. I understand that, but other people have faced just as amount of odds or worse odds. It's not because of the in 2021 a black person doesn't.
I don't want to do oppression Olympics here.
Something happened in
I don't really want to do oppression Olympics here. I just kind of want to analyze relationships and how things have happened. Like the whole Jews integrating into the United States is sort of weird. Like Like even that, they're like banned from country clubs for being Jewish for a long period of time. And even that, like now there's still like the waspy ones, or they're still they don't really like having.
But now
Jewish
they run
members.
Hollywood in the banking system, right?
Yeah, probably. I mean, probably disproportionately, if nothing else, right? There's like what 1% of the population
Definitely
is Jewish?
Disproportionately.
Yeah. I think the
So-
what is it,
so-
the Hyperion question
but-
instead of the Jewish question,
but
because all
do
these
you-
Irish people in charge of everything.
Do you think a brief period of slavery was worse than being in the Holocaust?
I think it's well. So we didn't Holocaust the Jews in America, so being removed from that, the actions taken are a little bit different, right? So after like World War II, well, there's specific comparisons we could do here.
Do you think there's a reason? Let's just make. I understand what you're trying to say there, so I'm not trying to interrupt you there.
Yeah, that's fine.
I get your point there.
Yeah,
but what I'm trying to say, do you think there's a significant reason that Jews have had wild success and blacks haven't? You think that's racial?
Well, sort of. Like so, for example, like redlining, which was in effect until like,
Jews were redlined too. Don't give me that shit.
Were they? Hey, I could be wrong. I'm not an expert on redlining. So, all right.
Yep, that's why they live in enclaves now. It's not because they're black, man. It's just not. In 2021, it's not. No kid born in 2010 has his life affected by shit that happened in the 60s. If anything, they're getting into college easier and getting advantages from it.
Well, I mean, you have those cascading effects that can last decades. I mean, the 60s was not that long ago. Which, like,
I mean, yeah, it was in the form of evolution of this country. What a kid again, what hurdle does a kid face today?
Well, you have generational poverty or generational wealth that wasn't able to be accumulated throughout a massive period of economic expansion.
No, you're saying it wasn't been able to be accumulated under these conditions, but it's just false. This is a fucking repeated narrative all the time. Go watch Thomas Sowell, watch Larry Elder, or somebody that speaks up about these kind of issues. The data is clear. You had millionaires in Tulsa. I brought this up last time.
Wait, what happened to those millionaires in Tulsa?
Yeah, I understand, but that doesn't have to do with
why they went down. They were still there. It'll be fun. Okay, you got to do the
they had a riot. They had a race riot there, but that didn't destroy that neighborhood.
Burned down
that's a
Black
false
Wall Street.
narrative.
Wait, it's a false narrative that they burned down Black Wall Street?
No, it's a false narrative that they lost their assets from that.
Oh, they lost their material businesses, and the government took no reprisal against like the people who did that.
Yeah, I understand how that was bad, but what I'm trying to tell you is in a worse environment, they still became millionaires.
It's hard because it was like different. Like it's a different environment. I don't want to like. It's hard because you can't do like a one-to-one comparison. Like here in Jim Crow versus now.
So you think it's easy? So you think in this world where a black man in this country right now can easily become president, and no, the country doesn't give a shit about whether he's black or white. You think that this is a worse time than pre-Jim Crow?
No, but I think it's
worse
in different ways.
Preposterous to say, right?
Yeah. So the reason I
didn't
hesitate, but I'm trying to think of how I want to. Wait, no, I want to qualify this better, right? So we could say like, would having a felony conviction impact you more now or 100 years ago or 60 years ago or whatever? And the answer is now, right? Because we have digital tracking. You can't just move to another fucking city and then start a job and no one knows who the fuck you are. You're just some guy who just showed up, last September, and now you start your business or you're working forever doing whatever, You can escape these things.
I mean, that's a claim, bro. That is a claim that it's completely without evidence.
That felony convictions now make it harder for you to get and maintain jobs or lose your lifetime.
You said it's harder now. You're saying it's harder in a world where people can sit on their computer and do anything. If you could code, so to say, you could have a job. There are tons of things you can do that don't have anything to do with it.
A felony conviction will hurt your ability to get any of these jobs, no matter where
it will hurt you. But the idea that it's worse now than in the past, it's just a claim you're making. What
I said was in terms of how a felony would impact you now compared to the past is dramatically different. That is the very specific claim I made. A felony conviction, how it will affect your employment. Don't okay me, man. Do you disagree or because the penalties we've associated with criminal activity in the past 50 years or so, from the 70s until today, are much different than they were historically. It's sort of like, hey, you did your time, go back to work, like whatever. The punishments were different in terms of scope, different in terms of length, different in terms of continuing punishments. You did not have a felony conviction that followed you around for your whole life. This is a very modern thing that we created. You have to be aware of this.
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is how, with the other contextual situations of the world, the internet evolved, cars evolved, all these other things evolved.
Claim. I made a very, very specific claim. Okay, let's like the car thing, right? Maybe you want to like work for Uber and be like a contractor, but you need a car within the last 10 years. You can't just do that with an old junker that you bought for $500. So like even that would be restricted in some way because your ability to get a loan or maybe even work for Uber. I don't know if they do
Uber, which didn't exist back then, is a great example of something you could do.
It's a bad example because your ability to get a car and work for Uber would be restricted by all these other things.
I mean, if you think so, I mean, if you're a bitch ass, I've seen plenty of people that had felonies and be able to achieve plenty more. I get that people have weak ass characters and can't just do things. I understand that.
And like you have to be aware of this. You're looking at the people who succeeded and just being, see, look, it's possible. And like I know it's possible. I'm talking about statistical outcomes.
To see that there's a bigger picture.
I'm not saying 0% of black people with felony convictions. 0%
yeah, man. I just don't know as many things to be true as you do. So go ahead and move on the rest of the thing. You're right. It was harder back then, even though you had way less job opportunity, unemployment rates were much higher. The value, you didn't have the same purchasing power to the dollar. There wasn't a deep underground drug market where you can make plenty of money. Go ahead, and I'll consent that you're absolutely right about this thing. That is just totally
the point was just that the penalties associated with a felony conviction, you said, are all things better. So we were talking about pre-Jim Crow to now. Are those conditions better or worse for people? And I said they are better, but they are like some things are worse and some things are better. And the specific thing I talked about there was just felony convictions and your prospects for employment after a felony conviction. Like in 1960s, if someone's going to hire you because you were black, they weren't going to hire you because you were black. Okay, the felony conviction didn't really matter. Now, a felony conviction is something that all employers look at. Maybe they're not looking at it along racial lines, but like a felony conviction will track with you from New York to fucking California. It doesn't matter where you end up in there, unless you had some weird mom and pop who just doesn't give a shit. But that restricts like your opportunities there in a way that didn't exist 60 years ago. Was my only point, a very specific point that is hardly disagreeable.
You're trying to like look totally at the disagreeable because of the outcome. If you're saying that this would have a greater impact, I understand that the bat may be being swung harder, but if you can take a harder blow, then the end result is what we're talking about. And what I'm telling you is I don't have the confidence to think I know as much as you do.
That's good. I mean, good luck making positive prescriptions on how to change the world in a good way. If you're so,
have you not looked at my civilian-led policing model and seen how I totally laid out how to completely make positive change in the world? Where the fuck were you during all the protesting that I was at? Were you at Standing Rock? I didn't see your bitch ass there. Were you there?
I was there. No, I wasn't there.
I know you weren't there.
Imagine if I was. Imagine I was. You would feel really stupid right there if I really was there.
No, you weren't.
I know I wasn't there. I'm joking. So. About an hour ago, I told you.
But the point you're saying about making change, I've done actual things. Sure. Like, go look at them.
Okay. And that's
so good luck making a change. I've already made more positive change.
Good, and I'm very like you and I agree on like probably 90% of shit. Okay, and what we're doing here is arguing about the 10%.
Why can't you just have a conversation? Why do you have to be so right?
Well, so what I was talking about here in terms of like the dog whistling thing, right? Is my desire to understand the like mechanics of how things function so that we can understand the world better and adopt policies that keep the realities of the country or time that we live in into account when crafting policy or having a campaign or creating political messaging or coming up with a slogan that's inclusive instead of exclusive. Understanding these things is very important. Like, for example, like I said, the whole race neutral thing in terms of policy, many people would get up my fucking ass about that, right? And my reason for that is because I think you can have a way where you invoke race in an inclusive manner where we talk about how like, hey, I don't say like, oh, that's racist to do that. Instead I say like, hey, what they're trying to do is divide us along racial lines, and together, like the working class achieves things together. That's what I think would be a better messaging, as opposed to saying like, oh, Donald Trump is racist. No, what Donald Trump is doing is he's trying to like get tax breaks for his friends, and he's trying to do that by resting on racial narratives to get us to vote against our interests. That's a message.
Again, I'm not comfortable with you knowing so much fucking things that you don't know. Pretending to know that what you do not know is a lie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You do not know why Donald Trump did things that he did, and to always project your most evil intent is fucking nonsense.
I'm talking about making a political argument, okay? When you're making a political argument, you don't caveat things. You just make a strong statement because that's rhetorically more effective. That's what I was talking about in terms of crafting messaging for doing something. And like, I care about also being accurate in that effect. And I'm talking about understanding how rhetoric is used and racial.
What does race have to do with this? I'm so confused.
I already told you that dog whistling was used to divide people as part of the Southern strategy. Over the course of about 20 years, you had the entire
dog whistling was an attempt to do that.
Yep. Well, okay.
Right, and your determination of an effectiveness is projected.
Okay, then Republicans engaged in dog whistling, and it had no effect. But coincidentally, at that same time, the South went from being very like pro-worker and pro-family to voting for the Republicans who did the Civil War like 100 years prior, and also didn't believe in like a social safety net and were exceedingly pro-business. They just abandoned all of those beliefs for fun, and they all just became libertarians. Like, I don't like what do I take from this? Like, that's what I'm required to believe instead.
That what happened? I'm just not following.
Sure, sorry, there's a little bit of a diatribe. So my point is, like, when I describe the Southern strategy and the mechanisms the Republican used to bring whites into the Republican Party,
right?
Tired or exasperated or a little bit of both?
No, I don't understand. I mean, I've heard the Southern strategy things before, and well, I've also heard people that totally disagree with your narrative and present as much evidence, more evidence that narrative of the Southern strategy is not true. That the Southern strategy.
I have also seen Carol Swain and the other one talk about it, and they were wholly unconvincing and also idiots.
Sure, all that's fine. I don't know who those people are, but what I'm trying to tell you is that thinking you know other people's intent is always a fallacious idea. Hitler thought he was doing good, very much so.
Yeah, I agree with you. And most people.
Right, so his intent wasn't to eliminate Jews. His intent was to do the best thing he could for his German people.
By eliminating Jews.
I mean, that might have been part of the process, but most of our history, from what I understand of that, isn't true either. This is why I'm very hesitant about the things we know. So I'm very confident about the things that are in objective measurements that are absolutely true. And then I try to cast doubt on all these ideas that people have of preconceived narratives and things they think they are true that they're really just projecting from their own limited experiences.
So let's talk about something that you made a very confident, because you're getting up my ass, which I don't really have a problem with in terms of me making claims for evidence I don't have. I think you said something to policy as a racialized outcome is illegal. That's something you said. Maybe you possibly misspoke, but it was in one of your conversation with the hippie-looking dude with a CUNY PhD, where you said, like, if you legally challenge a policy with a racialized outcome, it would be illegal. Is something you said.
Yeah, it is.
You are incorrect. You are just factually incorrect about that. The Supreme Court not only has not struck that down, but has ruled in the exact opposite. And you can look at McCleskey versus Kemp, which was a legal ruling about the death penalty being applied disproportionately along racial lines, like wildly.
Yeah, I again, because that's just because you didn't prove that was disproportional along racial lines does not disprove what I'm saying.
That's a racialized outcome for everyone who they analyzed 5,000 murder cases in the state.
No, it needs to be because of a racial reason.
Penalty.
Right. So what I'm also explaining is when 53% of the murders are committed by Black Americans, would you expect that 53% of them would be more likely to be on death row?
Well, no, this is irrelevant. So, like, what the study that was cited, it's called the Balder, I think it's Balder study. Baldus? Maybe it's Baldus. Might be Baldus. Anyway, what the Baldus study was citing was that Georgia had 5,000 murderers. Of that, a black-on-black crime had, let's say 20% went for the death penalty. A black-on-white crime was like 70%. A black-on-white woman or something was the X percent. So they just compared the percentage of all these people recommended death penalty. So this isn't just like,
okay, I don't care what.
The point was you said a racialized outcome would be unconstitutional or illegal, and that is incorrect. Because now you're changing.
I said a policy, right?
A policy with a racialized outcome.
Sure. What was the policy that you're saying that disproves what I'm saying?
Well, you cited the Supreme Court, which is not a policy necessarily; it's an interpretation of like statute. So it's not.
I'm still not following. What policy?
So the Supreme Court would not strike something down for having a racially disparate effect. That is what I'm saying.
Right.
You
said a policy.
Factually incorrect.
Are you not following, man? A
Try it again.
policy that is written and has racially disproportional outcomes because of the policy is the violation of the 1967 Civil Rights Act.
Wait, so
Okay?
okay.
Just because something has a disproportional outcome doesn't mean anything.
Wait, so you don't care about the outcome. You're talking about the intent of the law. If like the law specifies, or I guess tries to specify race, or implicitly does it, then it's racist. I'm confused here.
It would be I would have to you'd have to give me an example, man.
Okay, so
So
like,
if something discriminates upon what is it, sex, religion, race, what is it? It's gender. I think gender is getting at it, but whatever the national origin,
yeah,
they're illegal.
sure, but I'm saying
Read the
like,
1967 Civil
yeah,
Rights Act. I don't know what to tell you.
sure, like it. What is on paper there doesn't matter so much as how it's used or interpreted. So what I'm saying is an intent.
Yeah, yeah. No, 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 no. Just because somebody violates something or a ruling was wrong does not change the fact that it was illegal.
I mean, slavery is not mentioned once in our Constitution, but we had slavery. Actually, that's a lie. It was mentioned once, but it expired, I think. Whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't understand the point.
Uh, that's a good point. The point was that you said something that was incorrect. I wanted to point out how you made a confident statement on
No,
something that was not
no.
correct.
As you said, I said a policy. Just because something has a racially disproportionate outcome, like what you're saying, you would have to eliminate all the other variables because you're totally inferring because you don't have a written policy to say this. You're saying because a community convicted people and gave them harsher sentences. That has nothing to do with a policy.
Um, it has to do with.
Just like the crack cocaine disparity, that's not illegal, even though it has a disproportionate outcome racially based. The reason why the crack and cocaine penalties were written differently has nothing to do with race. That's why it's not illegal.
Whoa. I've never heard someone who came up with that take. Most people pretty much agree that the crack cocaine disparity was done to target crack, which was associated with black people in the 80s, late 80s, 90s.
I know what people say. Do you want to
Wow.
know the truth or do you want to hear the media narrative?
I would love to hear the truth.
Okay, so the truth is that the law was written to target the levels of drug dealers based upon essentially the class of the drug dealers. So you would have street dealers, you have street lieutenants, you have like the mid-level management, you have upper management, and you have distribution.
Mm-hmm.
So the penalties are distributed based upon those levels within the hierarchy. Now the problem is that crack, the lower level and the mid-level dealers, they're all dealing at different amounts. So you'll see a mid-level dealer in cocaine would be dealing with like 200 pounds of cocaine. This is obviously just bullshit numbers I'm throwing
Yeah,
out.
yeah, that's fine.
And then a mid-level dealer for crack would be dealing with grams of crack because of the difference in income levels and amounts of resources in the areas. And black people just happen to take the crack because you could flip it and make more of a profit. So you could take the cocaine, you could bake it, make rocks out of it, and you could sell it for more than you purchased. It's just good old capitalism. But what happened is because they penalized at the different levels within the hierarchy, and those levels had different things, yeah, cocaine has traditionally been a white drug and crack has traditionally been a black drug. But the reason that it's disproportional is to do with the level. It has nothing to do with the amount.
Okay, I'll look into it. What's your? Do you have like a paper or something on that I can like look to? Oh, I'm not
That's
making you say it.
that's
I
the
just so
law.
I can look into it.
Yeah, you could just pull up the law. I mean, I didn't know this at all. I thought the same thing you thought until I met and ran into the actual person that wrote the fucking policy for the government and explained it to me and showed it to me.
Hmm.
I was like, fucking A.
Huh.
The thing is media, one thing that a lot of educated and extremely smart people have known throughout the history, as far as I know back, is that everything the media is telling you is a fucking lie. And unfortunately, everything that we find in peer-reviewed literature these days is pretty much a fucking lie too.
Oh man, that's a scary world to be in. Then how do we know anything?
I agree, but people are aware of this. I mean, the peer-reviewed industry is absolute trash. I have not seen a well-written. I subscribe to criminology, and I'm not renewing it because for all these years I've been getting and looking at it, I've seen nothing good. Nothing. It's all just political narrative nonsense.
So I won't say what you're saying is necessarily incorrect. Um, now the value of the scientific method is that like generally we can correct stuff over time. So for example, one time I read a book
Who
called
the fuck is using the scientific method, brother? It ain't in peer-reviewed literature.
well, sure, but when we're talking about like as far as like social sciences go, we're talking about like the scientific method so far as we can apply it to that. You're talking about trying to record your steps. For example, you could find a study that let's say is based on a survey, and usually you could find the survey questions attached to that when in like an appendices or something. So you
Totally
can
agree.
review their questions and say like, oh, like that was clearly a really stupid fucking question because what does that even mean? That's open for so many interpretations. You need like more levels or more caveats or something. Like you're an idiot and you messed up horribly. Yeah. So like we very well could be in an area where academia is greatly politicized, and 100 years from now we're gonna be like, look at those dipshits pretending that like critical race theory is a real thing, or that black people didn't have a fair shake in 2021 or whatever the fuck. We could very well end up in that position. I'm not saying that I'm not so arrogant to assume that I'm at the precipice of human knowledge at this particular point in time, but those assholes 100 years ago, they weren't. I'm not so arrogant as to assume that. The reason why I have some degree of faith is because it's the best thing we have for generating information, in part because the studious like note taking, the ability to replicate studies or observe flaws in those studies even 100 years later is something we'll be able to look back on and like learn from our mistakes. So are we at a perfect point of information? No. Could all the flaws you identified be real? Yeah. I'm not bold enough to say no. But fortunately we do have ways to where we can evaluate those things and move forward with that. And I just don't know where that ends up if we just dismiss all of academia as being like completely broken at this point. I mean,
I'm not dismissing all of it, but what I'm telling you is the only value I see in it is they showed the things that make it easier for me to show how they were wrong. I agree with that. Totally.
Which is useful. I mean, I'd rather have that than any
yes,
other method.
and when people pick up a regular article, it just flat out lies to you. At least they lie to you and then they tell you the truth in the end.
Let's see. Well, let's see if we got.
But I mean, so let me explain, like the thing where I argue about the police not responding to demographics. Every single criminology report that I have read over the years, and I have read at least thousands of them, starts with the false premise that police respond to demographics, and it's an absolutely false premise that ruins everything that follows.
I don't want to say they start with like. I fucking hate that BLM. So one of the reasons I could never be an activist is I hate activists. I hate them so much. It involves you like removing nuance from the world to an extent. And like I agree with that. Okay, it's very hard to just be animated and motivated about something that is like fundamentally gray, right? Nothing's really black and white in this world. Nothing's all good. Nothing's all bad, right? Hitler built the Autobahn, right? Actually, that's technically not true, but whatever. You get the point I'm saying. Like there's probably a little bit good in everything. Maybe he was a talented artist. I don't really know. I never looked at his art. But the point I'm getting at here. Apart from the Hitler apologia that I have apparently opted to sidebar into, is that I don't like activist spaces because it tends to be like, oh, the police are all evil, all cops are bastards, the whole system is broken, and it's like, okay, like it is broken, but nothing's all that bad. But it's hard to get people really animated and having a nuanced perspective on stuff. You can have people like that, but it's hard to build a broad-based movement on a nuanced issue because it's unreasonable to expect most people to have a nuanced view on something. So like. I don't remember where exactly I springboarded off from this. I think you were saying something about like people shitting all over the police on them like targeting on demographics. I don't think I would say like 95% of cops, 98% of cops don't go out there like I'm gonna go bag me some N-words today. I don't think that's what they go out there trying to do.
Do you think there's 2%?
Come on. I don't know the exact percentage. I'm just throwing out a number.
There's fucking none, bro. There's like statistically insignificant for sure.
Okay, that are actively saying that, sure. That are
even thinking it, man. I just don't know. I mean, granted, I was in Baltimore, but the idea of somebody being like that in policing is just extremely foreign.
I think it depends where you are, and I think like it's never. I would say it's going to rarely.
Maybe, but people aren't people going to use Baltimore as like the example?
I wouldn't use Baltimore as the example. It's like a northern city at this point.
Yeah, but I mean, all of our disproportion, our long history of crime, our tons of killing people.
Yeah, you're more familiar with Baltimore than I am. Maybe I'm wrong to say we can't use Baltimore for that. I would say like if you look at particularly like rural cities in like Georgia and stuff, or even like police departments in Georgia, or like actually the LAPD has like had white nationalist gangs in it, like what was like the 80s and 90s or something. I don't want to oversell that. I'm not like super well versed on it, but I know they had gangs.
Right. And you gotta remember that if you're not talking at least 2010 and newer, I just don't give a fuck.
Winlandwood Vikings, deputy sheriffs. Hold on, let me just.
You know what I'm saying? It's just you gotta point the things. In most of my conversations that revolve around race and the past and all this stuff, it's just all these conversations are shit that was 30, 40, 50, hundreds of years ago. I'm talking about 2021.
This is in the 90s. Oh, the LA thing I'm
Yeah,
talking
and
about
policing
is.
and so let me give you an example. In 2015, people started protesting the killing of unarmed black men, right?
Mhm.
In the 5 years, now 6 years, but we don't have numbers for year six. In the 5 years since then, police killings of black men have dropped in half.
Yeah. Oh, I agree with you. That's one of the
That's
things
fucking
yeah,
remarkable.
I didn't make that complaint, but that's one of the things I'll get up about when people freaking out. The police killing black men. I'm like, to be fair, let's acknowledge the progress here. We've come a long fucking way.
Right. But we got to remember, even if our numbers are static, that's improvement because the population is growing.
Yep.
Right.
So yeah,
So
we're doing
at
great.
this
Don't
point
get me
in
wrong.
time,
Well, good.
the police departments and police officers from just 10 years ago are just not comparable. They're not comparable whatsoever. The things that I was doing on the street 10 years ago, like all the officers that I work with always joke about it, how you could never do those things today. And that was just 10 years ago.
I had one of those conversations yesterday. Like, oh, back in the day, this guy went on a chase. We caught him. No body cams. Beat the shit out of him. And it's like, can't do that today. It's like, I don't think you should have been doing that back then. If anything, you should thank this guy. Going on a 30-minute police chase where you're like the back of 25 cars, that's exciting. It's like a roller coaster at that point. There's no shootout. He didn't try and do violence against you guys. He just went on a 30-minute prolonged chase.
I get the joke, but we watch a lot of cars hit and kill innocent people in their, destruction path.
Yeah. So like, I hear that, but I'm just like, hey, maybe we shouldn't have been beating people. But to extent, and this is like my inner like pessimism. You're familiar with like the three like general eras of policing, right? Like the professional, community, and political era. It's not that important.
I mean, I understand the labels. I don't. Yeah, I never find any of these narratives actually matching to reality.
Well, that's sort of like policy focused on changing the way police are structured, right? The initial era, the political era, is when cops were just like appointed by the like the local like politicians, and like you're my people, and then when a politician would go, so would all the local cops, right? It wasn't a very organized system in that respect, and they were just there to enforce like even local norms. Like let's say it would just be like word's not the correct term, but like a small area of like New York City or something like that, or Baltimore or whatever. And the professional era was when like they had police in like they had police in cars, they had uniforms, they had like it wasn't political appointees, it was a separate organization. And the community policing is a more modern era where everything is much more standardized and recording. And I almost think it was better back in the previous one where like you show up to an area, the cops would beat the shit out of you and let you go home, as opposed to now where like maybe the police won't like brutalize you as bad, but then you just end up with like a felony sitting in the county jail for like 30, 60, 120 days. Then you get arrested or plead out to something, and then you have trouble getting a job. And it's like, oh man, all these things seem like they're lifelong consequences instead of like getting your ass beat and then just told like go back home. It's like, do I think that was good? No, but
no, you're right. Plenty of people on the street, I could tell you, would rather have taken an ass whooping than have been carted off in the jail for the night. They would have probably. I've definitely heard it from suspects themselves.
It's my actually, you probably know who this is. You know who Peter Moskos is?
Yeah, he's a fucking douche, but.
Yeah, a little bit. I like him enough. I read his book. And
man, I'm not interested in a rookie who spends about 6 days in the police department writing a book thinking he understands what's happening.
Yeah, I thought you might be familiar because I was like, oh yeah, he was from Baltimore. You're from Baltimore, and I know he's had conversations with like Glenn Lowry and stuff.
He served 1 year. We've had some serious issues with each other. He thinks that he never, somebody that never stepped foot in command, he was a patrol officer handling 911 calls for less than a year. Full of shit.
Maybe in terms of like the policing works, I don't really have a whole lot to say about that. But he wrote a book on the history of like the criminal justice system that was pretty interesting, called like In Defense of Flogging. And I thought it was like really funny because like the premise sounds like bad, like let's go back to flogging people, and then like the argument he basically lays out is like our current system is just so bad and archaic and just ruins people for like decades of life. Like, would you rather spend 10 years in like prison, or would you rather have like 10 brutal lashes and you're going to suffer? Like, you won't be able to sit down for like 6 months.
Totally take the lashes.
Yeah, like I'll take the lashes, and like I'm not gonna do that thing again because like the lashes is horrible. But it's like that's sort of like the world. Like, we got rid of corporal punishment and brutalized people because like that's uncivil. But how uncivil is it if you would choose that over a decade in prison? How can we swear that if most people would probably choose to get like flogged like
Yeah, totally.
brutally, how can we say that's the less civil thing? Like it's so incoherent. It's like I kind of refer to this as like I don't know if someone coined this. There's probably something for it because there's no way I'm this smart. But like this veil of civility, like it sounds more civil to like put someone in jail than to like flog them. You're like flogging. You're like, oh, that's what they do in like Singapore, Or I guess Singapore's a nice country. Thailand? Nope, that's also a nice country. We'll say some second, third.
They do
country.
flogging in Singapore.
They do it there, but I was trying to like invoke something that's like kind of a piece of crap country, but Singapore's not a piece of crap country. They just do flogging. So like, I'm like, okay, but it's like we don't think of ourselves as backwards, but then we do stuff like that, and like actually a good example is like the death penalty. You'll probably agree with me on this a little bit, maybe. I don't know how you feel on the death penalty, but this whole like, oh, we're going to, lethally inject them. How great does that sound? We're just going to lethally inject them. They're just going to slowly, drift off to sleep. And then you find out, like, how this actually goes down, where these people, like, they suffer for, like, an hour and a half. And it's like, why don't we just shoot them in the head? Like, was that so bad? Was it so barbaric to see people like, oh, no, we're going to give them a tranquilizer, and then their whole skin's going to burn as their lungs fill with water, and they slowly drown while compressed to a chair, unable to talk? It's like, is that really more civil? But it just looks more civil because it's someone strapped to a gurney, someone in a lab coat injects them with a couple of things, and then hopefully, if all things go according to plan, 15 minutes later, they're dead. When it doesn't go according to plan, they call off an execution, and the guy dies anyway. Like, it's absolutely barbaric if you think about it, and it's like, but we just throw this veil of civility on top of it. So I know this is a detour, but it's something that annoys me. But
I think that's what people are trying to do for police reform. They're trying to throw a veil of civility on it. And this is where I argue that I know I have a bunch of leftists thinking that I'm the one that's crazy, but it's only because I'm coming from a further left position than they are. I argue the same thing. When we were talking about when Freddie Gray was killed in Baltimore, everyone was talking about police reform in a matter that essentially was getting Freddie Gray to the prison system safely. It had nothing to do with discussing the idea of why we were putting him in it to begin with, which was my big objection. Why are we looking there anyway? And this also goes back to my other position about us going after individual officers. If you take away Derek Chauvin, let me tell you this right now. I can give you one person on this planet that is guaranteed to not put his knee on a person and choke somebody to death.
Yeah.
One motherfucker I can guarantee will never do that again.
Yeah.
So what do we do when we fire bad cops? I don't know. I think we're going to get worse ones.
Maybe.
I think it pans out to be true.
I make that argument for like people who like kill someone in drunk driving and they hit him with like a man 1 or man 2 charge or whatever. And it's like, well, who do you think's less likely to drunk drive ever again? I know if I did an irresponsible action and someone died for that, like, I'm not saying there should be no consequence, but like, do we need to ruin my life over this? Like, I don't want to say it's an innocent mistake. It's not an innocent mistake. Someone died for it, but like, do you need to throw two lives away for one horrible mistake? It's like, it seems kind of weird. But for the Chauvin thing, should he get fired for that? I feel like the answer is yeah, because it's such an egregious.
Yeah, you have to.
But yeah,
that's the point. Is what is replacing them if we don't look at the bigger process?
Yeah, man. Actually, I'm curious how you feel about this. So, like, I was arguing with some of the cops I work with, and I'm like, listen, like, I'll never use the term defund the police because no one knows what the fuck it means. So I just describe things, and I don't ascribe labels to it usually. So when I say, like, when I describe this, I'm talking about, like, we need more specialization, right? Like, I want, like, a mental health task force as, like, another thing that dispatchers send people to go do, The police will respond with mental health counselors when you have an issue that seems related to that. They would travel in pairs or something to that effect. That's something I'd want to do. And that's a response to like people like, oh, we just need to train police better. I'm like, no, that's like if I was doing home improvement projects, you're like, oh, don't get an impact gun for that, or don't get a sawzall to do this. Just take out your Swiss Army knife and go cut up boards. It's like, no, you should have specific tools to do specific jobs and not try and like have one person do everything, because then they're going to do everything shitty. We can specialize. We have enough people to do that. Where it's like, I don't want cops to be the bad guy, and I think they don't want to be the bad guy, but we just create a situation where like, hey, can you guys do this? Can you do that? Can you do the other thing? And we just keep stacking shit on them, and we're surprised when they like adopt these like rigid black and white attitudes and then like have issues with populations. And it's just like, it doesn't understand how like humans work, doesn't understand how this population works. Like, there's just so many problems there that can be solved by further specialization and restricting the roles of police. But I don't know, it frustrates me. That's what annoys me about like BLM and stuff, which I didn't think you'd agree with.
You're not getting pushback from me.
Like I said,
my idea of policing is that the armed officers, people like me, you should have in SWAT trucks, and they drive around, and you only use them when there's life and death situations where you actually have to use a hammer. I think the idea that you use people like me to talk to you about your domestic violence situation or your kid not going to school is fucking preposterous.
Yeah,
It's not
but
what I
you
am.
need to talk to that guy. I'm busy. I got you. Actually, I want to see what you think about this too, because to me, we're having fun now. You know, like we've settled. We're probably not going to ever agree on that other thing. You know, you think I'm a racist. I think you're ignorant. You know, and I can live with
No,
that.
I think those ideas are racist. Yeah.
Fair enough. And
I am ignorant, you know.
Yeah.
I can admit my end.
Well, I think you're specifically ignorant on this part.
Okay.
So I really hate the way SWAT teams are used. I think they're used excessively, and I think part of that is because we have them localized. Like, for example, if you went back to, I think it's the 1970s or maybe early 80s, I think it was like 7% of police departments had SWAT teams, and now it's like 93%, right? And you have these people who are just getting all fucking hot and bothered, being children who are like, oh, let's go use our toys and just go like for example, I grew up in a very very wealthy area.
Well, let me just hold you at one second.
Sure.
For one, I totally agree with you, but police officers don't make decisions like that.
Well, yeah, but I think it's because these decisions can be made. Like, if you have your toy, you're going to use your toy, you know? I know that probably sounds a little condescending, but
I know that sounds like it's a colloquialism that's kind of out there and it has some validity, but it's the mayors and the people in charge who want to see those equipment used. The officers just do what they're told.
Well, they request surplus through the oh man, I forgot the name of the program.
No police officer can do anything
not
like
the
that.
individual police, but like the departments like can request that. Yeah, that's
yeah,
like
but they're all the political appointments. There's no permanent rank supervisor doing this. There's no civil servants doing this. These are all political appointments.
Fair enough. I'll look into them. I don't think mayors are usually ones requesting that, but I wouldn't die on that hill, so I could be wrong. But my thought is that I think we should have less SWAT teams, and we should have them in a more regional capacity on like rapid response. Because I don't think we should be using SWAT teams to do like drug raids. Now there are some where you'd have to do it, right? Where you'd want to get the DA involved because like you know it's a biker gang, they have meth and they have guns. They said, well, you know, they'll never take us alive. You know, like you'll have something completely ludicrous like that could feasibly happen. But most of the time it's like, you know, like my brother sold marijuana and the cops raided my house with like 15 of them, guns out, pointing guns at me, and I'm just like, what are you doing? This is like a pound of marijuana. Like 15 of you came here, guns blazing, broke every door in my house. For what reason? You could have just asked me. Like I'm talking like interior door house. You're the ones where you could just twist them and then shove them and they'll open. They just kicked them off the hinges just out of sheer spite and caused like $1,500, $1,800 of damage or something. Just for no. It's like, what are you doing? This did not need to happen. Like you could just pick up my brother. You know, pick him up somewhere. Get the keys to our house and like go in. Like you could just do that very simply, and they just chose to do like these aggressive raids in like one of the safest communities in like the country. It's like this makes no sense, and this is widespread.
The idea that you think they choose to do that is what I object to.
Well, who's deciding to go do that raid?
The policies are written by the politicians in the community. They're not written by cops.
Well, sure, but if you go out of your way to have like, I don't think if you're like the LAPD, NYPD, and probably how many sworn were there in Baltimore? Like 1,000, 2,000?
3,000.
3,000. Okay.
3,000.
So if you have a large department, you can like probably have your own SWAT team where you'll have enough to respond to in terms of like. You know,
I'm not arguing against it. I totally agree with this concept.
But for like when I'm talking, the department that I'm dealing with was like 80 sworn people. Like you can't possibly pull an elite group of people from 80 motherfuckers. You know, like that's just not.
Of course.
This is not a thing. So I think like a regionalized thing like that, where the SWAT team, you have to go through an extra layer of bureaucracy where you can't use that for drug raids, right? You have
to I would argue that these are the only officers that should even be armed, ideally.
Hey, I don't have a problem with that necessarily. Huh? That's pretty interesting. Yeah, maybe you are a little. I wouldn't say further left. I would definitely toy with that idea. I wouldn't say I've committed to it just because like I'll try and focus on pragmatic conversations of moving things in a positive direction. I know that's gonna not move like 99% of the country. The idea of having unarmed cops, even though like there's plenty of.
But they wouldn't be cops at that point. The only cops I think should be SWAT cops and detectives.
Yeah, I would. I was a little toyed with the idea of having like non-sworn traffic enforcement.
We already have it in Baltimore. It's like this is my big objection too. Like the vast majority of things that people act and propose for like police reforms have already been done, and plenty are in place in many areas. They just aren't actually effective at all.
you think non-sworn traffic
Like for
enforcement is
instance,
not effective?
the idea that we separated civil asset forfeiture from our police operations in Baltimore did not change policing in Baltimore.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know too much about the asset forfeiture stuff. Um,
I'm just giving you an example. For any
yeah.
of these police reform ideas that most people have, they're actually in place somewhere. They're just ineffective because of the ultimate idea that society wants to punish and they want to feel safe and they want to seek revenge against people they think are wrong.
Do you think
They're
that's a
wrong.
default disposition, or do you think
Yeah.
it's just a modern thing? Because my impression that's a modern thing. I don't think that's like the human default.
Well, I would.
Well, maybe
I
it's the
would.
human default. That would be a wrong way to say that, I think.
I largely argue that human beings are the apex predator because we cooperate better than anybody else. Our key trait is our cooperation. But we cooperate in directions that seem to be a little unpredictable. And I think that people are actually cooperating, but towards this bad idea that vengeance is justice.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I guess like the point, I guess the question I was sort of asking is, I don't think societies or like people are necessarily geared towards that default retributive mind. Like, you have plenty of other countries that aren't anywhere near as retributive.
Yeah, it's American
I
for
am
sure.
not saying that word correctly, but you know what I'm saying. Retributive. There we go. I got it that time.
Retributive.
Yeah. Oh boy, close enough. People are picking up what I'm putting down. That. Oh, sorry. Where was I going with that?
No. You're right. Other places
Yeah.
don't do it, but in America, it seems very clear that we associate justice with vengeance. You can see it with cops. You can see it with any kind of relationship whatsoever. It doesn't matter. The idea that Derek Chauvin being locked in prison is remotely towards justice.
Man, it makes me so. Not that I don't think he should be like in jail or prison. Like, so far as like, I guess, a consistent application of law. I don't really care about consistent application of law. I care about justice. But it drives me insane when people are like, oh, he should be like executed or put in prison for the rest of his life. I'm just like, really? Like, aren't we supposed to be the like rehabilitative side that everyone can, I know that black guy, he murdered someone in like an armed robbery, but he can recover. But like George Chauvin or Derek Chauvin, who like kneeled on someone for 9 minutes in like what I would say is like aggressively callous, and maybe we could say wasn't trained correctly. I don't know. I don't really care. That this guy is irredeemable. Like, you're clearly consumed by vengeance here. Like, that's all this is.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't care. Like, I don't care about like vengeance at all. I mean, we discussed that before. So when I see like the left like consumed by that, I find it very frustrating because it's like antithetical to what I think like we say we believe in. And that's what I get mad at like most of the conservatives about, is like the blade hypocrisy exists everywhere, and like you see it flourish in any of these movements like that sometimes, and it is exceedingly disheartening.
But this is what I'm talking about with Malcolm X, and this is why I feel like those words were very prophetic in his position about the white liberal. I'm not using whiteness, and I'm actually using it more in a way that he does. He means it as just like the people in charge, the elites, is really what he means when he says white power. But those are the people that end up doing all of the bad, whether they even with seemingly the best of intentions, they create the actual policies that end up in the bad positions. And I think that all the goodwill and all the good intent in the world is wonderful, but it just doesn't have anything to fucking do with looking at the incentives and disincentives for human behavior.
I guess now that we're at a different place, I want to try like I guess I say it's been like 2 hours and change. I guess we'll both like wrap up. But I guess like the frustration I sort of feel would be like when I'm proposing like we make these positive changes that require like tax money to go towards X, Y, and Z to improve education, or food stamps, or like whatever, and then when people say like, oh, but you're gonna get like these dregs or unworthy people who are getting that, and well, I interpret that as being usually associated but not explicitly saying along racial lines, right? Like the whole T-bone steaks things I mentioned earlier. And I think I have an idea of how to deal with that. It's not like calling them racist. I don't think that's productive at all. I think most people will say something like that and not interpret it as racist, because they don't conceive of it as racist, even if there is some sort of like racial like a connotation buried there. I guess I'm like, I feel like I need to acknowledge a relationship, but I guess your point is like I'm just putting words in their mouth, or I'm putting thoughts in their head, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that more or less? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, totally. And I think that my experiences talking to a lot of people and trying to narrow down what they're actually talking about is they might say something racist on the surface, and then you try to narrow down what they're talking about. And like for your instance, what you'll find out they're talking about is that the evidence for giving people incentives, like to give homeless people homes, doesn't do anything. To give homeless people on the corner money doesn't do anything to help them. Giving handouts is a direct incentive for people to keep receiving handouts. That's how people work. As much as we wish it was a different way, whatever you incentivize, you get more of, and whatever you tax, you get less of. It's just the facts. And I think the left largely likes to attribute their emotions or to overwhelm those kind of just basic factual situations.
Wait, so you're saying that? Hold on, can you say?
Helping
Give me that more
people
time.
is almost impossible because you almost always end up just being the enabler and making the situation worse.
Um, well, I usually try and pitch things more along universal lines. I don't like. I worry about disincentives.
I don't care what the universal line is. If you whatever you do, you incentive. So whatever you hand out, you are incentivizing that behavior. That's how humans work, flat out.
Hmm, hmm,
So no matter what you do, if you hand people sandwiches on the corner of the street, yeah, you're feeding people, but humans love to think that they're not just a regular mammal. And really, ultimately, we're no different than Pavlov and his dog.
yeah,
I'm not above this, and I always want to point that out. Whenever I
yeah,
say something that's shitty about humans,
yeah.
I mean me
No,
too.
I do that too because like the Pavlovian like developing like response to things, you know, the old dog whistle, or any sort of like learned response, because you can have like weird responses like that for all sorts of things, not just like, you know, whistle and you perform an action, but you can develop like all these types of like weird responses to things that people don't necessarily realize are related. But yeah, it's kind of funny because I think like because of my job, I have a lot of time where I can just sit around, play on the internet, read studies, listen to books, read books, whatever. So I have a lot of time to like browse or like not browse, but like try and evaluate like things I think and why I think them. And I think that's like a very constructive way in getting people to like evaluate like positions they have, is like sort of a, I guess it's like a street epistemological thing. Like, oh, why do you think what you think or something?
Mhm.
It's something that more people could definitely get used to. Funny, it's just like what therapists kind of do. They just talk to you like, well, why do you feel that way? And then they just make you kind of like talk through it. Because I've definitely had things where
Yeah,
like I've
totally.
said them like I had something I was thinking that was incredibly stupid, and then once I said it out loud to someone else and externalized it, I'm like, oh, I'm an idiot. That was incredibly dumb. But I don't know. Felt like it's always good to humble yourself and learn stupid things. I don't know.
Well, that's
Let's.
why I say we all should be writing these things down. If we have ideas that we think should matter, you got to write these things out and put them out there for public scrutiny.
Hmm,
If you got a problem with anything I've said or done, it's recorded and there's
yeah,
written forms of everything. And if you have a better point, I will change my idea and move on. I am not a static person by any means. I mean, I am the cop that,
yeah.
that came out doing all this kind of stuff and talking
Mm.
differently. And
Well,
I think it's important, man.
hey man, I had a fun time. You know, you still a piece of shit, and you know, I had to put my balls on your forehead. As I said in the YouTube comment section. No, I'm just messing around. But you know, I figured we would like, I saw something you were saying. I'm like, we're gonna agree on 95%, and like what's funny is like we're gonna like go to the mat on like the 5% of crap we disagree with, and it's funny because our conversation is so shifted over to the left of like American discourse, where like we're having this like niche discussion on like critical race theory, or like, you know, the concept of like whiteness and blackness and like whatever. But yeah, do you talk about like, I guess like your columns? Do you talk about anything else? Or you deal like primarily with like policing and criminal justice stuff?
I mean, so I switched my academics to management because I was starting to see that the issues in policing
Mm,
were managerial and had like this business aspect to it. One of the reasons was probably because the CEO of the Baltimore Police Department, so we could just call the commissioner, he's the CEO of the organization. This is the
mm,
largest budget item in the whole city's tax base. So it was like 53% of
mm.
Baltimore's budget is policing, and is led by a motherfucker with a GED. I was like, Man,
Oh, buddy.
no wonder all this is messed up, right?
Just failing
So
basic
I
arithmetic.
will speak sometimes on some managerial issues, but I almost largely stay entirely to my field of expertise and try not to speak out of it.
Yeah.
My field of expertise draws in a lot of social sciences, which I didn't anticipate. And really, as a cop, I think what we're talking about is arguing for policies and procedures that incentivize and disincentivize certain behaviors from both the citizenry and the cops. And these things aren't going to be what we think is obvious. So I really try to get into the things that go against our narratives, much like suicide. So like suicide's kind of tangentially related to policing, but it's very important that if you want to combat suicide, that you don't fucking talk about it. And that's mind blowing
Like
to most people.
the 13, like you have like copycat stuff. Like you're probably familiar with the show. What's it called? Like 13 Reasons Why or something.
Yes, right. So
Yeah.
the suicides went up after
Yeah.
that show, and and when that show came out, I told my wife, I said, I can't believe they're fucking doing this. They're gonna make suicide go up. You know my position on this, and and it goes up subsequently because we don't have free will. At best, we get multiple choices. So the best thing that we can say is that at some point in time, somebody put a couple things on our list. So we might have A, option B, C, D. And once you start talking about suicide and depression or whatever, then suicide gets entered as selection E, as as an available option for when you are facing these situations as a human. And the best thing that we can do is not put those things on people's multiple choice answers. And that's the great thing about no free will, is that we literally, every action that we take influences whoever we're interacting with them. It fundamentally changes who they are and changes their path on a butterfly effect, no matter who it is and no matter how small the interaction was. So we need to do everything we can when we're aware of how the multiple choice test works, that we do not put those detrimental things on other people's list of options. And race and gender are two of those things that I believe belong on that list as much as suicide does, because anything that is a construct that we have created and presented as an option is something we can take away.
But how? Okay, I know I said we're ending it, but I guess I have like one last follow-up. Like, how would you take away, for example, like I mentioned, portrayals in media or something? How would you take away like race being portrayed in that? Like, I feel like you'd almost have to affirmatively, or at least like cognitively, be aware of painting people in a certain light in order to give a positive image in some respect. Like, for example, this was understood in like the old, I forgot the name of the.
But it sounds terrible. You have to avoid the public discussion of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you would have the laws, and when somebody does, obviously people are going to have to talk about how you treat other human beings, and I would put rape up there with like murder. With these things actually shouldn't need to be discussed, but I get your point.
Yeah.
That we would just have to stop doing it. We would have to stop glorifying rapists. You would have to stop talking about it. You'd have to stop putting it in the newspaper, and that's very counterintuitive to what people think should be happening. So if somebody's raped, they would want to put in the newspaper, look what we did to this person who raped, but that's just not how crime and punishment work.
Cool, man. Well, hey, I had a wonderful time. Would you I have a friend of mine who's also like an ex-cop. And he does a lot of like political content on YouTube as I wouldn't say decent size. Like I think he's got like 5,000 subs or something. Would you be interested in having a conversation about your position on like incarceration, on people who should be incarcerated or not? I guess I'm pitching you this.
Yeah, I mean, I'll have these conversations with anybody.
Yeah.
You know, that's part of my whole gig, is that I don't run from any challenge.
Yeah.
I don't care whether you have one subscriber or a million. I'm not. That's not who I am.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to hear you two have a conversation about your different views on like the role of policing as both being former cops, because you like said to me, hey, I didn't live through it. It's like, well, he did, you know. So, and he's pretty. Yep. He's like more like center right. He's a pretty reasonable guy. He's a good hombre. But yeah, I guess that's it. I guess I'll end my recording over here.
Yeah, and you can go ahead and put him on there. And since we're using Skype records and will give you a backup file anyway.
Oh, does it automatically record these?
Yeah, see at the top, it should say it. I pressed the button.
You know, I saw. Oh, you know what? I did see that. I just actually never read it. I just saw the button in the top corner, and I just wasn't thinking about it.
So as soon as we stop, it'd be like probably like an hour or something. Then they'll put a file in the chat of everything.
Oh, cool, man. Well, that was
Yeah,
fun.
just so you know.
The more you know, knowledge
And
is
yeah,
power.
it was good talking.